upon their seas and golden sands, the sunshine ever beam. Upon their seas and golden sands, the sunshine ever beam. May peace reign from shore to golden sands, and God bless and keep us true. May peace reign from shore to golden sands, and God bless and keep us.
I would like to thank Roshana James for the rendition of the national anthem. Next, on our programs, we have the teacher song, and this would be done by Sheena Cloudel.
Oh, teachers of this young nation, a fertile land and sea, rise up and make our nation strong, and serve SVGTU. All teachers must unite as one, for all work hand in hand. We'll dedicate ourselves and strive for strength and unity. Our task as teachers we pursue the noblest task of all. Join hand in hand, united stand, be loyal to our call. With various talents rightly used, a mighty force will be. Our own resources we will choose to build a nation free. Now then, arise, let's take one stand, be firm and never bend. Let's take our people, sea and land, a just home our end. a just home our end.
Thank you very much, Miss Clouden, for the rendition of the teacher's song. Next, I call on our committee member, Mrs. Samantha Brown Cordes, to do the invocation. Ms. Cordes, I believe you're mute.
Sorry about that. Dear Lord and Heavenly Father, we thank you for your love, your mercies, and your grace upon us. We pray, Heavenly Father, today as we begin our series of sessions as a union, we pray, Heavenly Father, that your will be done. We pray, dear God, for your special anointing over the presenters, dear God. We pray, Heavenly Father, that you would give them wisdom. We pray for every participant who is listening to the presenters, dear God, that you would give us understanding, Lord, so that we would be able to be more informed about COVID-19 and vaccination. So we thank you, Lord, for this opportunity to meet as teachers, as citizens of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Cordes. Again, I am your Masters of Ceremonies for the afternoon, and it is my pleasure to bring you the welcome remarks. This summer workshop comes at a very special time in the life of our union. We have gone through so much for the past 2 years as teachers. COVID-19, dengue pandemic, and of course the eruption of La Soufrière. And with these, we were presented with challenges in the teaching and the delivery of lessons and learning of our students. As a result, we had to retool in order to do that. Thus, this workshop comes on the heel of that retooling. We ourselves as a union recognize that we too need to retool. And with that, we are now doing the workshop differently. We are here to meet the needs of our teachers. We are here to retool with them and come alongside them in learning new technologies and new ways of delivery of lessons. As such, we are here to meet the needs as a union, along with our partners at the CTF and the Ministry of Education. Now, without further ado, I welcome all to these series of workshops, remembering that it would not just be a 1 week or 2 week workshop as it was in the past, but as we move forward in our retooling efforts, we have seen the need to break apart the workshops into several sessions and make the workshops more accessible for teachers who will not be able to do the daily workshops. So therefore, I thank the Ministry of Education early. I would like to thank our partners at CTF, and I would like to thank our union representatives, our industrial relations officer for bringing together these workshops, and for those committee members who would have been involved. I would thank you here and now, and I would say welcome to our workshop and our first session of our workshop. And I am looking forward to seeing all of you and even more teachers in the sessions to come. I thank you. And now we have the remarks from Mr. Westdale's CTF team leader.
President of the Master of Ceremony, Ms. Fiona Charles, Minister of Education, the Honorable Curtis King, other officials from the Ministry of Education, SVGTU President, Brother Oswald Robinson, executive officers and staff of the SVGTU, Course Director, Brother Andrew John, participants, and members of the media, all protocols observed. My name is Wes Delve, and I am the Program Officer at the CTF FCA responsible for our partnership with the St. Vincent and Grenadines Teachers Union. I bring you greetings from the CTF FCA President, Brother Sam Hammond, the CTF FCA General Secretary, Sister Cassandra Hallett, and from all members of the CTF FCA Board of Directors and the CTF FCA staff. I am very honored to have been invited to and to be present at, albeit in this recorded message, the opening ceremonies for your summer 2021 virtual workshops. The COVID-19 pandemic has certainly changed the way we work, and accordingly, the way that we have had to continue working with our partners. After we had to cancel the 2020 edition of the Summer In-Service program, it was our hope, obviously, that we would be able to return this year to the more traditional model. Unfortunately, that is not the case. However, it is a testament to the ingenuity, the dedication, and the tenacity of the SVGTU that a program has still been prepared and will shortly be implemented. Further, not only have you and all Vincentians had to deal with a pandemic, but also volcanic eruptions and a hurricane. I cannot imagine what this year has been like for all of you, but if you will allow me to share briefly, my first experience as a Canadian co-facilitator with a Summer In-Service program was actually in Grenada in 2005, Hurricane Emily, if you will recall. So I have had some experience in these kinds of circumstances, and to some small degree, I can relate to your current situation. The fact that this program is being delivered and that you are all here today in order to pursue professional development during your summer vacation so soon after a triple threat to regular SVGTU activities is astounding. I also understand that teachers outside of the red zone opened their hearts, their homes, and their schools in order to help others through such a challenging ordeal. You have all gone above and beyond the regular duties of educators. I respect you, I commend you, and I am in awe of you. And so I would like to officially welcome you to the Summer 2021 Virtual In-Service program. Thank you to everyone for being here today and at future sessions. I hope that you will all benefit from the virtual workshop series, that you will discover some new ideas for your classrooms, and that your love for the best of all professions will grow. I wish you nothing but success. Long live the SVGTU CTF FCA partnership, and long live the SVGTU. Thank you.
And thank you to Mr. Delves for bringing remarks from the CTF. Now, I would like to call on Mr. Michael Burke, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education, to deliver his remarks.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon to our partners who are helping to build this education enterprise. And we're immensely grateful for the support, and we welcome the opportunity to work closely with the union to deliver this critical program that would benefit tremendously teachers and ultimately the students, our clients. I must apologize here for the absence of the Honorable Minister, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Ministry of Education. He was the person designated to do so, but is unavoidably absent. He is currently at Parliament. But this program is important as it represents a new mode of delivery online. It represents as well the expansion and evolution of knowledge. And as we know, empires and nations are built on knowledge. and nations are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So we are admonished on biblical principle to seek knowledge always, to find knowledge and gain wisdom and understanding. So we can never amass or accumulate too much knowledge. So it is important that we continue the learning process, that we continue to develop, that we challenge ourselves, that we find creative ways of delivering, creative ways of learning. So the Ministry of Education is indeed grateful to be considered as a partner, a friend to the union. We have had excellent relationship with the union in the past, and we anticipate that this excellent relationship will continue, as the union not only represents teachers who are part of the union, but the union represents the interests of all stakeholders. So again, thank you for this opportunity, and the Ministry of Education wishes this program success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, P.S. Burke, for the delivery of your remarks. At this time in the program, we now have the president of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Teachers Union, Brother Oswald Robinson. He will deliver his remarks for the opening of this workshop series.
Master of Ceremony, Mr. Fiona Charles. Mr. Michael Burke, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education. Our Course Director, Brother Andrew John, and our Technical Director, Brother Sheddy Conliffe, members of the National Executive and staff, our distinguished facilitators for this evening's presentation, Dr. Malcolm Grant, who is also the District Medical Officer for the Southern Grenadines, and also Mr. Elliot Samuel, who is the head of the Laboratory Services at the Ministry of Health, Wellness and the Environment. Fellow participants, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, I want to join with the Public Relations Officer to extend a hearty welcome to this very important training, professional development for members of the Teachers Union, and by extension, other teachers here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This year, we have more or less upgraded this program because it is not only going to be held for 2 weeks, but it will go throughout the end of this year and by God's will, next year. And so this is a significant improvement over the previous years. I want to use this opportunity also to again emphasize the excellent tripartite relationship that this program would have seen over the years, and it continues to bloom. And I speak specifically of the relationship with the Canadian Teachers Federation and the Ministry of Education. This is a very important relationship. We cherish this relationship. We continue to work together in the interests of quality education. And as the Permanent Secretary, Brother Michael Burke, would have mentioned, by extension, the students who are our clients. This workshop comes at a very crucial time when the whole world every day is speaking about COVID-19, a pandemic that has torn around the lives of many nations. Over the past months, the Teachers Union was responding to the needs of our members who have been affected by the last of eruptions that took place on the 9th of April. And we still continue to look forward to our members, and in the upcoming weeks, we will be responding in monetary terms and in also other tangible ways. And I want to use this opportunity to thank those who have come to our assistance so that we could assist our teachers. I want to commend the work of our course director, Brother Andrew John, who would have worked tirelessly also with our technical director, Brother Sheddy Conniff, and also other members of the executive, also our general secretary and our assistant general secretary and other members of the executive who would have worked tirelessly in bringing to reality this program. This is a demonstration of our commitment to professional development and quality education. And we look forward that the participants in this program, that you're going to participate meaningfully. And as you interact with the facilitators, we'll be monitoring very closely to see other express needs that you have so that we could add to make this program even more fruitful and beneficial to you. I want to thank everybody who have contributed in one way or the other to bring us to the stage. And I want to officially declare this workshop open. And may God bless you. Thank you and every success.
Thank you very much, Brother Robinson. Now I will ask Brother Andrew John to come and give us the course outline and course briefing for the workshop sessions, after which we will continue with the program as scheduled.
Permanent Secretary, the Ministry of Education, Brother Mekubok, President of the St. Vincent and Grenadines Teachers Union, Brother Oswald Robinson, other members of the National Executive and staff of the St. Vincent and Grenadines Teachers Union, our Technical Director, Brother Sheddy Conniff, West Dells, Course Director for the Canadian Teachers Federation, Dr. Malcolm Grant, facilitator for this evening, along with Mr. Elliot Samuel, fellow program participants and members of the media. The St. Vincent and Grenadines Teachers Union, the Canadian Teachers Federation, and the Ministry of Education in St. Vincent and Grenadines have had a long, rich history of cooperation and collaboration over the years, with the implementation of the annual summer workshop. In the past, this program was administered via face-to-face learning. However, with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the very existence of the program and the continued execution of the workshop was threatened. In light of this, the National Executive of the St. Vincent and Grenadines Teachers Union must be highly commended for quickly adapting to the changing times to ensure that the annual workshop continue, and not only continue, but to evolve to the benefit of our members. As course director, I was charged with the responsibility of arriving at suitable topics that would meet the needs of our teachers in these times. In order to do so, I sought the expert help of a genius by the name of Sheddy Conniff, who will be the technical director incidentally for the duration of the workshop. Mr. Conley, who is astutely in tune with the burning issues of teachers, was able to assist with the developmental structure and the topics for the workshop. With the collaboration of the National Executive, the CTF, and the Ministry of Education, the program was finalized as we see it today. My task this evening is to provide you with an outline of the topics to be covered over the next weeks and to explain to you how the workshops would be run. Now, the workshops will be conducted in 3 phases. First of all, we have those what we will refer to as localized situation dealing with the vaccines, as will be tonight's topic, vaccination and testing, a balanced medical perspective. So that's a localized situation, therefore it will be dealt with by resource persons from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. COVID-19 legal consideration for employers and employees. This would also be dealt with by local consultants, local resource persons. This will be followed by pastoral care and the teacher. Now you'll realize that because of the difficulties which were explained in a few minutes ago by the president and others, teachers would have gone through a lot. And so we need to be in a position to take care of our psychosocial, aspect of our teacher. And therefore we move on to the other topic that will help with this: mental health and the teacher, motivation and the teacher, and leadership and the teacher. When we're finished with these 3 topics, along with pastoral care, you will see that we are looking at the personal, the psychological, personal and psychological development of the teacher. So we are hoping to meet the needs of the teacher in not only in the professional development, but in a psychosocial manner as well. Then we move on to the professional development aspect of the training. This, of course, will be done using this Microsoft Teams platform, and they would include planning and execution. This will be 2 sessions: the planning of an effective ICT inclusive lesson and the delivery of an inclusive ICT lesson. So we move right on to where we have the IT specialist. Now, I should have mentioned in the previous 3 topics, the Canadian Teachers Federation will play an instrumental role in the delivery of those programs. That is the mental health, motivation, and leadership of teachers. They would work in collaboration with a local person, a local tutor, to deliver those programs. So these professional ones down here, which I just mentioned, planning and implementation of the ICT lesson, those would be administered using ICT professionals, most of whom would come from the teaching service or the Ministry of Education, as the case may be. We have also had interest from persons as far away as the United States of America, where the platform of Microsoft Teams is the one used. And so we have persons who are showing interest in helping us to deliver this to our teachers. Now, the final program, which will be offered, will be trade unionism, and this program would be one sponsored by the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Teachers Union. So we'll be looking at trade unionism and the impact it has on our lives as teachers. I want to urge you to participate in as many of these sessions as possible and to encourage your fellow colleagues to do the same. The sessions promise to be informative, interactive, and educational. They will be done on a bi-weekly basis. So we'll have 2 in August, go right up to December. Let me take this opportunity to welcome the very first group of participants today and to encourage you to be receptive and open to learning and to sharing your experiences. I wish you every success during this summer workshop, and we look for continued cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brother John, for giving us a synopsis of the course outline. Next, we have the vote of thanks from our very own Sister Petty Kid Ring, General Secretary of the Teachers Union.
Protocol already established. Good evening, everyone. I have been given the responsibility on behalf of the SVGTU to express gratitude to the following persons for making this evening's ceremony a success. First, I would like to thank Sister Samantha Brown-Cordis for inviting God's presence into this evening's proceedings and the other upcoming sessions of the Summer Institute series. Thank you, Sister Samantha. Mr. Roshana James, who was brave enough to accept the opportunity of beautifully rendering the national anthem this evening. Thank you very much. It is my hope that your voice will continue to be used to bless others. Our sincere gratitude to Mr. Mika Burke, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education, for gracing us with his presence and presenting brief remarks on behalf of the Honorable Minister. Thank you for your ministry's full support and approval to conduct this workshop. We are proud to know that we are doing it right by you. We cannot say thank you enough to Mr. Westdells and the team at the Canadian Teachers Federation for partnering with us over the many years to ensure that our summer workshops are a success. Even as we all face this pandemic, they continue to show their solidarity through collaboration and cooperation to ensure that we enhance the professional development of our members, whether it be physically or virtually. A sincere thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you to Mr. Andrew John, Course Director, and Mr. Sheddy Conley, Technical Director, for their integral role in conceptualizing and developing every session that will be executed throughout this series. Your hard work and dedication begins to bloom today. Thank you to all our facilitators who will be presenting to us today, specifically Dr. Malcolm Grant and Mr. Elliot Samuel. We look forward to the fruitful and interactive session that will immediately follow. Finally, thank you to all our participants for registering for our first session. We do encourage you to register for the subsequent sessions. Share your experience with our colleagues and encourage them to participate. 80% participation and you will receive a certificate. For all those whom we have not mentioned and have worked behind the scenes to make this implementation a reality, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Rain, for the vote of thanks. And with that now, we officially declare our workshop open, and it's time for the first session. I now call on Sister Atika James to give the introduction for our facilitators for this session.
Dr. Malcolm Grant is a Vincentian-born family physician who has lived and worked throughout the Caribbean. An alumni of the St. Vincent Grammar School, he was recently the District Medical Officer for Union Island and the Southern Grenadines. He is now in private practice. He has followed the COVID-19 pandemic quite closely since its inception and has been asked by the Ministry of Health to address a number of groups throughout SVG regarding the COVID vaccine. He is very proud to call himself a fellow teacher, for he was part-time tutor in medicine at UWI Cave Hill. I present to you Dr. Malcolm Grant.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, fellow teachers. I consider it both an honor and a privilege to be addressing such an audience this evening. Let me first of all say that I am, as soon as you support one thing, for example, I support the COVID vaccine, you are labeled, or if you're against it, you're labeled anti. If you support it, you're labeled pro. I don't consider myself pro-vaccine at all. I am rather pro-science, because there are a number of vaccines that I have not been able to embrace after reviewing the science over the years. For example, there was a vaccine that was under development for HIV/AIDS. And when I looked at the science behind it, I was definitely not the least impressed. Similarly, there were vaccines that were looked at for dengue and Zika. And again, looking at the science behind these vaccines, I was not impressed. The last year, when the pandemic was declared on the 10th of March, Oxford University announced the following day, I think it was on the 11th, that they were going to develop a vaccine for the SARS-CoV-2 virus. That's the virus that causes COVID. And they immediately started working on such. Now, a lot of people, one of the things they have against the vaccine is that it was rushed. And looking at it superficially, it definitely seems rushed. I mean, here you have a vaccine supposedly developed between the 11th of March and, being basically trusted in the public by January 2021, certainly less than 10 months. And compared to the length of time other vaccines have taken to be developed in the past, it definitely does seem rushed. But I just want to stick a pin here. The virus that causes COVID belongs to a family of viruses called the coronaviruses. And the coronaviruses, there's 7 which have been identified in mankind, of which 3 are a very severe variety. Besides SARS-CoV-2, the first one was identified, the first severe one was identified in 2003, and that was SARS, known as severe acute respiratory syndrome. At that point in time, we were very concerned that that was going to become a pandemic, and there was a move afoot to develop a vaccine, and the initial steps were made. Now, we were able to bring that outbreak under control, and it didn't become much more than, I think it was less than 1,300 people worldwide that were infected. Now, the next coronavirus that appeared on the scene was MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, which appeared in 2013. And at that time, we thought, well, look, this was the one that was going to become a pandemic. And then vaccines were tried in humans, many, many humans, hundreds. That was brought under control, and not through vaccination, prior to vaccines being widely administered. And there was no further need to go into the use of vaccines widely on thousands upon thousands of individuals. Now, however, we have followed those individuals who have been vaccinated with very, very similar vaccines, basically almost the same platforms that are being used today, as well as almost an identical virus, okay? Very, very little change in its molecular structure. And those individuals, 8 years after, have not been shown to have any long-term side effects that are one of the things that's bandied about. Well, look, you're taking this vaccine today, you don't know what sort of long-term side effects you're going to have in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, etc. True, we can't say what are the long-term side effects that we're going to experience, but there's no known vaccine that has ever been administered to adults that has had effects beyond 30 days. In other words, after administration of the vaccine, if there's going to be, most side effects occur within 48 hours. But in rare circumstances, side effects may occur up to 30 days after the administration of the vaccine. Now, in use of very similar vaccine using adenovirus platforms against very, very similar coronaviruses, there have been no long-term side effects reported in individuals who were vaccinated against the Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome. So, this is something I want to get out of the way. I want to deal with some of the concerns. Another concern is, look, why am I taking a vaccine? There's, only 12 people have died from this condition in St. Vincent, and over 2,000 people have recovered. Okay, true, only 12 people have died. True, they have stated that over 2,000 have recovered. However, recovery by definition under these circumstances is essentially defined as someone who was once positive for the SARS-CoV-2 virus and has subsequently tested negative. It does not address what sort of effects it may have on an individual, okay? And there's something called long COVID, which we have seen and are seeing in St. Vincent in individuals. And I know I've had one patient, and I know of quite a few others who have had COVID. And this particular individual that I know of, she's actually a police officer. And she didn't even have a severe form. She had nothing more than a flu-like illness. And this was when they had an outbreak. This was back in December, January. And she's still having long-term symptoms, okay? She still has loss of sense of smell, loss of sense of taste, and she's complaining of one of the over 200 symptoms associated with long-term COVID, which is vaginal dryness. Now, one may say big deal to any of these three, but it's a big deal to the person who's suffering from them. Now, I mean, any of us, we can relate to coming down with the flu from time to time. We are miserable when we can't taste, we can't smell. We are, okay, this person related a story. She said, here was she cooking in her kitchen, well, in her family's kitchen, and cutting up the vegetables while the pot was on the stove. And her stepfather shouted out to her from a room in the back, look, I think something is burning. And she said, well, impossible. I am here and I'm not smelling anything. And he said, no, check. And she went to check. And there was the food in the pot actually starting to burn. Now, she couldn't smell that less than 3-4 feet away. Now, you may say, what's the big deal? If your house is catching a fire, you can't tell, okay? She says that you can put pepper on her tongue and she can't taste. Now, I'm not downplaying her symptoms, but these are relatively mild symptoms compared to the range of symptoms that are associated with long COVID. Long COVID can, in the worst case scenarios, can cause diabetes, type 1 diabetes, which does not respond to tablets. It needs, of course, you need to be on insulin, literally for the rest of your life. It can result in what we call brain fog, which for a teacher, that's the last thing that you want to experience, forgetfulness, not being able to concentrate. It can put individuals on a downward spiral in terms of loss of memory and the early signs of dementia. It can cause general aches and pains, shortness of breath on minimal exertion, excessive tiredness, and there are cases that are going on for well over a year, not necessarily here in St. Vincent, but other parts of the world. Now, I equate it to, a lot of us can relate to, there was an outbreak of a virus called chikungunya, which occurred 8 to 9 years ago. And the individuals that most of us know of, 1 or 2 persons, or even ourselves, who are still reporting aches and pains and tiredness, some 8 years after. Now, COVID is a lot worse. They're showing that with MRIs done on individuals, MRIs of the brain, individuals who've had moderate to severe COVID, they're showing changes in the brain that's equivalent to, in young people, is equivalent to what you would see in a 60, 70-year-old, okay? When they do CAT scans of the chest, they're seeing changes of the lungs in young people. There's the equivalent to what you would see in individuals who have been smoking 20 to 40 cigarettes a day for 40 years, okay? And this is not restricted to only people who have had severe or moderate COVID or been hospitalized. These have been found in even some people who have been asymptomatic, some people who have even suffered with only mild symptoms. So COVID is not it's not, okay, one extreme or the other. Well, okay, if I don't die, I will live. But the question is, what is the quality of life for a lot of people? And based on what we are seeing, and based on the scarring in organ systems and the number of organ systems that COVID can affect, and I go back to that in a moment, based on the scarring we're seeing in these organs, we suspect that most of these changes are irreversible. And why a lot of different organs are affected by the organism that causes COVID, that's the SARS-CoV-2 virus, is because this virus generally attacks organs that have a particular type of receptor known as the ACE2 receptor. And this ACE2 receptor is not only found in the brain, it's found in the heart, it's found in the lungs, it's found in the kidneys, it's found in the gastrointestinal tract, it's found in the blood vessels, it's found in the pancreas, okay? So all these organs can be affected to varying degrees, okay? So when you're taking a vaccine, you're not only taking it to prevent death, but you're basically also taking it to try and prevent these long-term complications. Also, you're taking it to try and reduce your chances of passing it on. Now, a lot of people downplay the efficacy of the vaccine by saying, okay, you can still catch COVID. Now, I equate the vaccine to something like a raincoat. You put on your raincoat, you go outside, your intention is, well, to protect yourself from becoming soaked. You may not be able to protect yourself from getting sprinkled or becoming minimally wet. In other words, you take the vaccine, you may still get a mild to moderate form of the illness, but once you're not immune compromised, you're not frail, you're not very elderly, it's very, very, very unlikely that you will end up with a severe form of COVID or end up dying. And this is even so with the new Delta variant. And the Delta variant, a very, interesting version of the SARS-CoV-2, the original novel coronavirus or SARS-CoV-2 virus. It, from all reports, is 100 times more infectious than the original COVID virus. Also, they put it on par with chickenpox in terms of one's ability to catch it, okay, especially, well, obviously if you're not vaccinated, and to pass it on to others. And it is one of the most infectious, if not the most infectious, respiratory tract virus known to man up to now. So the Delta variant has not been identified in St. Vincent's yet, but it doesn't mean that it's not here. And Mr. Samuel can confirm this, Mr. Elliott Samuel, right? But with the testing of samples, not all, the Delta variant, for it to be identified, the sample would have to be sent off to Trinidad, to the lab there, and they will say, yea or nay, have there been any Delta variants within the sample pool? Now, not all samples are sent off to Trinidad. They do a sample of the positive samples, a random sample. And up to now, nobody has turned out to have this Delta variant. But the Delta variant has been found in Barbados, less than 100 miles away. So there's no good reason why the Delta variant should not also be found in St. Vincent's sooner rather than later. And that is a variant that's spreading throughout the world right now in a very, very rapid way and a very worrying way. And yes, the vaccine is less effective against the Delta variant than, say, it was against the original coronavirus, but it still gives you a better chance of fighting it than not having any protection at all. And interestingly, in countries where the vaccine programs were what I call stratified, in that it was first given to the elderly, the frail, those with what we call comorbidities, and it was not given initially to those, the young and the strong, etc. The individuals who are most likely to come down with the Delta variant, besides the frail, the immune compromised, and the elderly that have been vaccinated, are the young individuals who have not receive vaccine. And these individuals are found in a disproportionate manner to be ending up in hospital. Now, here in St. Vincent, we don't have quite the privilege of individuals in age-matched individuals in North America, the UK, etc., in terms of having access to the hospital facilities that are needed to keep us alive if we do come down with the Delta variant or any type of COVID that puts us in hospital, because we have very, very limited spaces in terms of ICU space. I haven't checked recently, but up to 3 months ago, I was told that there's only 2 ventilators operational in the hospital, and there were only 2 anesthetists who are qualified to operate these ventilators. So if we have a rush, look at Trinidad, they have, I think, over 1,100 cases of COVID. 1,100 people have died from COVID up to now, okay? And they have a special chest hospital known as Cowra Hospital, and their capacity is a lot more than us, but yet they can't, at times they can't keep up with the demand. If St. Vincent gets a significant outbreak, we would not be able to keep up with the demand. Now, the things we worry about, potential side effects. The main side effects that you see are very transient. You have the flu-like illness that occurs normally within 24 to 48 hours. I took my vaccine on a Sunday, February the 14th, and the following evening, Monday evening, I felt a little under the weather, general aches and pains, a slight, very, very mild fever, a bit tired. I was at that point of, do I take some paracetamol, which I knew would help, or do I just go and try and sleep it off? I decided jump into bed. And by the following morning, I awoke with feeling fine. I was able to work. I had a clinic in Ashton, Union Island on a Tuesday, which I took care of. Now, the other side effect, immediate side effect that one hears about is what they call an anaphylactic reaction. Anaphylactic is a severe type of allergic reaction, which is extremely, extremely rare. But all vaccination centers in St. Vincent are equipped with the necessary medication that can reverse an anaphylactic reaction in a matter of a couple minutes. And that's why you would ask to hold on for 15 to 20 minutes after receiving the vaccine, because if an anaphylactic reaction is going to occur, it normally occurs within that time frame. The other side effect that we've heard of is the clots, okay? I just want to stick up in here for a second. Now, the clots, I've tried to review various studies in terms of the frequency and in terms of the fatalities associated with such clots. And I've been able to review an Australian study that was published about 3 weeks ago, which showed that approximately 1 in 2 million would die after receiving the adenovirus vector vaccine, specifically the Oxford AstraZeneca. That's, I agree, 1 too many. However, okay, when you compare that, okay, you at a fork in a road where you turn left and you go through an area where there's a 1 in 2 million chance of dying. It's not good. But you can turn right, which you face the COVID. And there is well, all right, we've had 12 deaths amongst, let's say about, I think just under 5,000 people. Okay, so you extrapolate that to 1 million, okay? My maths isn't the best, 5 into 20, 10, 200, 200 by 12, that's about 2,400 deaths, okay? So your chances of dying from COVID is 2,400 times greater than dying from the vaccine at St. Vincent's current death rate, okay? Now, the reason why this is a frightening sort of thought is that, okay, all right, the analogy I use is, I try to use analogies that we can all relate to. let's say about, let's just call a figure, 10,000 people may have traversed the Leeward Highway last month, probably more. Let's just say 10,000 people for the sake of this presentation. And between Kingston and say Chateaubriand and back. And I think there was one report of somebody, very, very unfortunate story of somebody having died in a motor vehicle accident. Now, the newspaper has reported that, and that's the norm. Newspapers report adverse events. They report things that catch the attention of their readership, boost their sales. By boosting their sales, they can demand more from the advertisers, etc. Now, they didn't report, which is understandable, the 9,999 individuals who made that journey without incident, okay? If you were a visitor, somebody who is not familiar with St. Vincent, and you read that article in all the, be it the Searchlight, be it Eyewitness News, be it the news, be it the Vincentian, etc., you would tend to assume, wait, boy, this trip is dangerous. Look, all these newspapers are reporting that this incident took place. And if there was another incident like that, God forbid, the newspapers would report it too. And so that is essentially what is happening relative to the vaccine and the clots. The news organizations, be it AP News, Reuters, ABC News, etc., CNN, they are going to report what is happening in an adverse way. They're not going to, I'm not for a moment trying to shove it under the carpet. I'm just trying to put it in perspective. In other words, so we are fed with this information, and it's natural for us to assume, look, this thing is going to be, this is dangerous. We are potentially going to be killing ourselves from this vaccine. To be able for something 1 in 2 million to happen to us, we are literally going to have to vaccinate everyone in St. Vincent almost 20 times, okay? Yes, one is going to assume, or one is going to say, well, what, suppose I'm 1 in 2 million, okay? Yes, you could be 1 in 2 million and wins the lotto, but what are the odds of that actually happening in real life, okay? And what are the benefits to be gained by you accepting the vaccine? It is your right not to, but, and I understand anybody rejecting the vaccine, because even though, as was announced at the beginning, in my previous life, one of the things that I did, I was a part-time lecturer at University of West Indies in the Faculty of Medicine. And one of the things I taught is evidence-based medicine, and trying to get students to understand what statistics and what they mean, etc. And if I didn't have that background, a lot of the videos that I watch would be extremely frightening. On a personal level, when I was in Union, the vaccines first came down, I think, on the 13th, which was the 13th of February, 13th or the 12th. Anyway, 1 or 2 days before the official launch, which was on the 14th of February, the Sunday. And we had 3 vials. And these vials each contained 10 doses. And we had 21 people who signed up. So it meant that we would have the last vial, which only 1 dose would have been used. And we would have, once you have not used the contents of a vial, after 24 hours, you have to discard. So it was going to be a pity that we would have to, we call around the teachers, we call around the police officers, etc. Everybody said, no, we ain't taking no vaccine, etc., etc. So I then said, look, let me start reaching out. And I started reaching out to persons I knew in St. Vincent who were interested. I didn't call my kids initially because I didn't want anybody to think that I was pushing my kids to the head of the line and jumping the line. So I called a couple other people who knew my kids, and my kids, adult kids, contacted me, Sharon. And I said, they asked, can I get the vaccine? I said, have you all thought about it, etc. Not because I had doubts, but the individuals, I wanted to make sure they weren't taking it because of me. They said, yes, Daddy, we've done our research, etc. you have any objections? I said, no. There were the 3 of the last 9 who came down and had the vaccine, okay? My point is, on a personal level, no one can quite explain why would I, an individual who has done quite a lot of research, and this is not 2 hours on YouTube or 3 hours on Facebook. Since the vaccine development was announced, I would estimate I've spent between 2 to 3 hours per day, every day since then, up to yesterday, trying to bring myself up to speed. And my sources of information, I go to journals like the Lancet, the New England Medical Journal, the American Medical Association's journal, Nature, and those types of journals, which not only publish articles, but also publish what they call peer-reviewed articles, where literally when you publish an article, or before you can publish an article in these journals, they are almost torn apart by others, okay, looking for flaws, etc., looking to catch you out. And at the end of the day, if they can't find anything, the article is essentially given the green light for publication, okay? And that's what I have used as my references. And my point is, I have been able to say confidently that there is a lot more to gain, forgive me for saying so, but a hell of a lot more to gain than to lose by taking the vaccine. Now, the question is why, okay, why would teachers need it? Now, again, in terms of returning to the classroom, most of the individuals that one would be interacting with, once you're not at the community college, and even at the community college, you'd be interacting with some of these individuals, would be persons under the age of 18, okay, who would not be vaccinated. And these persons can not only be vulnerable in terms of getting the virus, because the younger persons can get what they call multi-system inflammatory syndrome. And multi-system inflammatory syndrome, I'm in a chat group where individuals who graduated from my year, medical school, we are all part of that chat, and got some very sad news either towards the beginning of last week or the end of the previous week, where the colleague of mine who is in charge of the sick COVID patients in Antigua was not happy. He was very, very depressed to report that they lost a 7-month-old to COVID. Barbados has lost about 3 months ago, they lost a 9-year-old to COVID. Guyana has lost a few kids, children to COVID. I can't give you a specific number. I think it's 3 or more. A number of children have come down with multi-system inflammatory syndrome. Most have not died, but a lot of them were hospitalized, and some are now suffering with long COVID. So one is trying to form an additional shield around such individuals who cannot take the vaccine. And because they can't take the vaccine, they can be exposing the teachers too. Because if you have 31 or 30 plus individuals within a class, okay, they are interacting with you, especially younger ones, they're innocent, they're coming up to you, teacher, can you explain this to me, etc., etc. They're literally right in your face. They don't understand the severity. So teachers there's a two-way reason why you can benefit. You can benefit by actually, yes, the vaccine doesn't give you 100% protection from passing it on, but it significantly reduces your chances. So you can reduce your chances of you being responsible for infecting the child. And similarly, you can be significantly protecting yourself and almost completely protecting yourself from hospitalization and death if you are not in the immunocompromised category. And immunocompromised individuals who have things like leukemia, on certain medications, who may have HIV, who are on cancer chemotherapy or were on cancer chemotherapy, individuals who have diabetes are partially immune compromised because their white blood cells, etc., do not work as well. The immune system doesn't function as well. even if the diabetes is well controlled, it doesn't function as well as somebody who is a non-diabetic, age match, everything else being equal. So while I am not someone who believes in compulsory vaccination for any group, I do believe that certain groups should seriously consider being vaccinated. Somebody who lives in the bush and hardly interacts with anybody, I definitely wouldn't be pushing vaccine there. Another person who interacts with a significant number of people within any given time period, and especially teachers who are floating from class to class, like secondary school teachers who are teaching class 1, period 1, and class 2, period 2, etc., where you can potentially interact with over 100, 150 children in a day, there is a significant chance of you being exposed to the COVID virus, and not only the COVID causing virus, not only the SARS-CoV-2, but the variant, which is the Delta variant. Now, we have other things that, it can alter your DNA. Now, let's go through the vaccination process. The vaccine is injected into the upper outer aspect of your arm, okay? That muscle is known as the deltoid muscle. It specifically goes into what we call myocytes, which are the muscle cells, and the fibroblasts, which are around the muscle cells. When the vaccine goes in, it doesn't go into all the muscle cells in the deltoid. It goes in specifically to the muscle cells entered by the needle. Now, this is basically carrying a message into your muscle cell to start producing the S protein. The S protein is otherwise known as spike protein, which is found on the surface of the coronavirus. Now, this protein is expelled by the cell, and your body immediately recognizes it as a foreign body and starts producing, using both what we call the humoral and the cellular immune system to produce T cells as well as antibodies, okay? And these antibodies then destroy all of the S protein, and it destroys the muscle cell, which is the myocyte, and the fibroblasts, which originally manufactured the S protein. And this occurs within a matter of days. So there's no evidence, apart from your antibodies, which you produce every day. A bug enters your system, the flu bug, any type of bug enters your system. Previous vaccines, be it measles, mumps, rubella, tetanus, all these things are given to with the intention that it stimulates the immune system to produce the antibodies. So these antibodies lay in waiting. So just in case later on you are exposed to the real thing, these antibodies then neutralize the invading organism before it can set up shop and multiply to a point where it causes significant disease. So that's why it may not recognize the Delta variant as well as, say, the original novel coronavirus, but it still recognizes it. So it stops it from going on to becoming a serious form of infection, which would cause hospitalization and death. You may still get a mild to moderate form of the illness, which is no more than a flu-like illness. But there is nothing going into your cell nucleus, which is going to alter your DNA. And this, this is another fallacy, another thing that is put out there to basically try and dissuade, try and frighten people away from the vaccine. And as I say, I don't blame people for being afraid, because I have found that in St. Vincent, there's a disproportionate number of these videos going around, these stories going around, which are telling you, well, look, I mean, you're basically going to be killing yourself if you're taking this vaccine. So don't be so stupid as to take the vaccine. And if you hear this often enough, if you hear the people tell you, look, why are you going down that road? You know, so many people are dying down that road. Whether or not it's true, you would have never been down that road, but if you hear it often enough, you're going to start saying, well, okay, if so many people are telling me this story, after a while, well, then it must be true. I better not take the chance of going down the road. But there's a little old saying that I remember from my late father. They used to say, and he used to tell us, look, be careful when you all think you're running from the jumbie, you don't end up in the coffin. And essentially, you're running from something mythical. You're running from something that people have told you that exists, but none of us have ever seen. At least I've never seen one. And, but I've seen a number of coffins, okay? So you may end up in something real, and you don't want that. Granted, as I say in St. Vincent, only 12 people have. But I find that an amazing statistic, because Trinidad, which is just a couple hundred miles away from us, has had a totally different experience. Mind you, their population is, I think, last time I checked, about 1.6, 1.7 million people, which is about 17 times ours. But even when you multiply 17 by 12, you can't get 1,100. Trinidad has had a much higher rate. So the question is, okay, why in St. Vincent we have been so blessed up to now? Is that going to continue? Okay, it's like, I know a young lady from Union who I ran into about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I teased her because I knew she had won the lottery. She's in Union. She had won the lottery 3 times. So I turned to her and I said, look, you're not up here to collect another lottery winning. And she put her hand over her mouth, bursting into laughter, and said, yes. I said, you gotta be joking. She had won the lottery 4 times. I mean, how lucky is that? But it happens. And I think that that is essentially what we're seeing in St. Vincent. St. Vincent is winning the lottery up to now relative to COVID. But that winning, getting ahead by chance, is not something that's sustainable. It's something that eventually the odds are going to change, okay? And because there's no good reason. I mean, in St. Lucia, who has a population of, I think, about 80,000 more, they've had 4 times the number of deaths that we've had. Okay, Antigua, which has less than us, has had, I think, twice the number of deaths. So, here I think a lot of people are saying, well, okay, I'm not going to take, I saw somebody earlier today and I asked her, why haven't you gone forward and taken the vaccine as yet? She said, I'm waiting on the Cuban one. Now, first of all, we don't know if we're going to get it, okay? Cuba has close to 10 million people to vaccinate. And I suspect, and I don't blame them, if they concentrate on their population first before even considering exporting. I think things are very, very tough economically in Cuba right now. So I don't think Cuba is going to be as benevolent as they've been in the past and are going to be donating and giving away vaccines like they have because they can't afford to. They're going to have to try and cash in on their vaccines. St. Vincent, can we afford to pay for those vaccines, especially as the economy contracts, especially as tourism becomes more anemic? Okay, so waiting on the Cuban vaccine may not be a smart option because COVID may, especially Delta variant, may catch up. It's going to probably interface with most of us, I suspect, within the next 3 to 6 months, okay? And when I say within, it may be tomorrow, it may be 6 months from now, but there's no way that we can, as much as you may take precautions, the social distancing and wearing a mask and, trying to, keep to yourself as much as possible, etc., you're going to be able to manage to keep yourself totally free from being exposed to the virus, okay? You can try and keep yourself free as long as possible, but you just hope that when that day comes, you are in a position to not be vulnerable to it. A lot of people have the attitude, well, okay, I live a healthy lifestyle, I eat healthy, I exercise, that's great, and I strongly recommend. But none of those things give you antibodies. And there are only 2 ways you can get antibodies. You could only get antibodies either through getting an infection or getting the vaccine. And even getting the vaccine is not, you don't get antibodies right away. The vaccine takes, if you take the vaccine today, it takes 10 to 14 days before your antibodies reach any levels of significance. And with our 2-dose vaccines, our significant levels are not arrived at until 2 weeks after the second vaccine. And with our regime, you're looking at between the first dose and the last dose and the 2 weeks, you're looking at anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks. So, okay, a lot of people I know are playing it down to the wire and say, well, okay, if there's an outbreak, we just go and take our vaccine. But you are going to be in a very vulnerable place for around 8 to 12 weeks after even having your first vaccine, okay? And that is before being able to have your second, plus 2 weeks after that. So, to take that is to take a big chance. And, I'm saying, all right, I think most of the doctors who are talking vaccine, pro-vaccine, people like Dr. Keyser, Dr. Duncan, Dr. Thompson, myself, we have, I think, well over 100 years of medical practice between us. Why would we all of a sudden get up one day and decide we're going to push something that is known to be harmful for our very own people, our Vincentians? But not only that, for our children, all right? Our family, our mothers, our sisters, our brothers, our aunts, our uncles, our friends, okay, our workmates. It hurts sometimes. It hurts because it's like you telling somebody the truth, and you know you're telling them the truth, but this person still, by their actions, they're still basically calling you a liar. They're still saying, well, look, I know you can't be telling us the truth because you are an agent. Nobody can pay me to be an agent, okay? At the end of the day, I have to live with my conscience. And as I said, nobody can pay me an agent to the point where I'm going to expose the loves of my life, which are my kids, okay, to something that I know that is harmful. That makes no sense. When my children had their vaccine in Union, I didn't choose the vial that they were vaccinated from. The sister who was given the vaccines that day, Sister Williams, she chose the vial. I didn't even know what vial, because it didn't matter to me. As far as I know, they were all good vaccines. And, as a matter of fact, on a personal level, I hate needles. I hate needles so much that I was trying to be the last one that particular day to be vaccinated. So yes, I was the last one that day to be vaccinated. And by the way, the needle wasn't as bad as I thought, because I was looking away. And I had asked my kids if they could take a picture of the actual needle going into my arm. And I saw them intently taking, the corner of my eye, a couple of photographs. And I couldn't believe, well, how they would be taking, and I'm not feeling it. And I looked, and there was a needle in my arm, and I literally couldn't feel it. The needle was so fine. So for those of you, and apparently up to 10% of people worldwide, avoid vaccinations because of the fear of needles. It is not as bad as you think. But the point I was making, because I was the last person that day, this sister said, Dr. Grant, we don't have enough vaccine from one vial. So I have a little bit in each one. So I'm going to have to put the needle in each vial, each of the other 2 vials, plus this one, to get enough to vaccinate you. And I said, go right ahead. So in other words, technically, I was exposed to whatever was in the 3 vials also, okay? And I didn't mind. It didn't cross my mind for a second that could this be something that one vial was free of poison, the 2 others were. No. But these are all fallacies that are out there. Getting back to the clots, forgive me for being all over the place, because I'm trying to not speak from notes. I'm trying to just, touch base as I remember things, because I don't want to sound rehearsed, but nevertheless, there is about, when it was back in mid-May, I had a lady in Union who called me. She said, Doc, I'd like to come and see you, but I can't walk. I'm in so much pain when I put weight on my foot. My calf is hurting me out of this world. So can you do a house call? So I said, not a problem. Went to see her at her home. And when I examined her calf, the calf swollen, tender, and extremely warm. Clinically, she appeared to have what they call a deep vein thrombosis, which is otherwise known as a clot in the calf. I said, well, you know, I'm not sure if that's what it is, but I'm going to have to send you to St. Vincent to have a ultrasound. Sent her to Dr. Ambrose in Stony Ground, who did the ultrasound, who confirmed that it was a clot. Dr. Ambrose sent her down to the hospital. So I had called the lady about 2 days after, no, probably 24 hours after she was in hospital to find out how it was going. And just about that time, the story of clots associated with vaccine had come out. And she was asking me, Doc, where's everybody I'm seeing asking me if I had the vaccine? I had the vaccine. So I told her, I said, because there's a story out there that there's that the vaccine is associated with clots. But interestingly, this lady had never received the vaccine, okay? Never even came close to a needle that was given the vaccine. Never even, I think, came close to a person who received the vaccine. My point is clots occur naturally. A woman taking the contraceptive pill, the chance of having a clot is approximately about 1,200 in every million. Somebody who smokes, the chance of having a clot is approximately 1,700 per million. Clots, and this lady, and person who's not a smoker, not on a pill, no vaccine, about in a population like St. Vincent, we would have about between 12 and 15 people per year who would have clots, okay? But having said all that, if this lady had had the vaccine, there was no way that myself or anyone on earth could convince her that it was not related to the vaccine, because it would have been a natural, the brain naturally would have associated it. You see, she had the vaccine and subsequently a clot formed, which means that the clot that formed was associated with the vaccine. Now, I have followed this whole phenomena extremely closely in St. Vincent. I know of one person, I heard there's a possible second, who may have had a clot after the vaccine, okay? Well, sorry, one definitely, okay? The clot that's associated with the vaccine is associated with something called a thrombocytopenia, which is a low platelet count. Now, this individual who had the clot, there was an initial story, he was given the vaccine 6 days before he developed the clot. I checked specifically, and I'm not going to, if he had a clot associated with vaccine, I tell you that, you know, I regret to announce, but he did not have the thrombocytopenia, okay? With that it's a specific type of clot, all right? So the individual I'm referring to apparently was extremely overweight. He lived a very unhealthy lifestyle. He was a diabetic and a hypertensive, okay, which again increases your chances. But we hear these stories and we take them wholesale. We don't ask, well, look, let us look into this a little further. We're dealing with something extremely serious here. So it's not something, if there was a cause, you would like to know. But if there was no association, you should also like to know, because you wouldn't want to be making a very significant decision based with misinformation or false information at your disposal, okay? Okay, yes, as I mentioned before, one of the concerns is that the vaccine is knocked over. Can I still get COVID? Yeah, I saw something written on the internet today that this person said they decided to get a vaccine because the vaccine is 70% effective in terms of preventing them from dying. They had it a bit wrong, okay? The vaccine, first of all, is more than 70% effective in terms of the vaccines available. That is both the Oxford AstraZeneca and the Sputnik. They are more than 70% effective when it comes to preventing all forms of COVID. In other words, you have 100 people getting the vaccine completing their course. With the Oxford AstraZeneca, maybe about 80 with the about 90 will not get any form of COVID. With the Oxford AstraZeneca, 20 will get a mild to moderate form. With the Sputnik, 10 would get a mild to moderate form. Once you're not immune compromised and you are not frail like a very elderly person, you will not die from the COVID if you get it. If you are immune compromised, there is a slim chance of dying. It is still recommended in the immune compromised because without that level of protection, your chances of death increases significantly. If with that level of protection, it doesn't guarantee that you won't die, but your chances of dying would be extremely slim. So to reject the vaccine altogether is to say, well, okay, I would take my chances going out in the rain and getting soaked, okay? And you're getting soaked with COVID and you could end up ending up with the worst case scenario. Now, a lot of people say, well, okay, does it protect you over the long term? We can't say for this vaccine definitively, and only time would be able to tell us that. And as a scientist, it would be very irresponsible of me to say, I know definitely, or any scientist or doctor to say that they know definitely it would give you long-term protection, or you wouldn't have to be vaccinated, get boosters from time to time. But, so what if we need a booster? To me, that's a minor inconvenience if it's going to protect you from the severe form of COVID, which includes hospitalization and death. But just using a previous example that I used, which was the vaccine that was used in the trials for MERS patients to prevent Melissan respiratory syndrome. 8 years later, when patients have been tested, they still have significant antibody levels within their bloodstream. So if this is anything to go by, we see no reason why the Oxford AstraZeneca and the Sputnik should not result in significant antibody levels years down the road. But if studies show otherwise, show that there's a drop-off, there does seem to be a bit of a drop-off with the Pfizer, but it has not been shown. And that's another thing. When people read these stories in the press, they're quite often reading stories about apples and assuming that this story is talking about bananas, two different fruits, two different vaccines. So the Pfizer, they've shown that the antibody levels seem to drop off after 3 to 6 months. This is not being shown with the Oxford AstraZeneca or the Sputnik. So assuming that these antibody levels are maintained, well then, great. If they're not maintained, you will be offered a booster. Now, in terms of the variants, a lot of people say, well, okay, why am I taking a vaccine if it will work against the variants? The most worrying and troublesome variant up to now is the Delta. And I'm not aware of any studies relative to the Sputnik, but definitely it's shown with the Pfizer and the Oxford AstraZeneca. It seems that those vaccines are still extremely effective against the Delta variant. So up to now, the vaccines seem to be quite effective against the variants. But are variants going to arise that they're not effective against? That's possible. But the longer we take to become vaccinated, the unvaccinated, contrary to what is written out there, are the ones that the variants are rising. Now, if there was a supernova tomorrow exploding not far away from Earth, and the radiation from such wiped all humans off of the face of Earth, you would have the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which survives and needs humans to survive, dying. So the more humans that get vaccinated is the more of a barrier one has to the SARS multiplying. So the SARS uses the opportunity in unvaccinated individuals to multiply. And the more it multiplies, is the greater the chances of a mistake being made or mutation occurring. And when a mutation occurs, you can then have what is known as a variant. Some of these variants are mild and are less infectious. Then not all variants are necessarily more infectious, okay? Some are less infectious than the original. Some are equally infectious, some are more infectious. We obviously worry about the more infectious ones because the more infectious ones are likely to what we call escape the vaccine. And those are the ones that why we tend to push the vaccine, because if we can reduce the number of individuals available to this virus to multiply within, is it less likely you're going to have a variant strain occurring. Okay, now I know there's talk of testing. What the reason for the reason for the testing, I haven't spoken to anybody official from the ministry. I have not been working with the ministry from the 4th of June, okay? But, okay, if one is not vaccinated, one wants to know that the person who is within the environs of the classroom does not have the virus. And the virus tends to live in the nasopharynx, in the nostril. So that's why this swab is done. The recommended frequency is 2 weeks, but some would even say that that's not often enough, okay? There's some workers in some parts of the world where they literally test daily. It's a relative, the test has become a little bit more comfortable with time because they tend not to push it right back into the back of the nose, which can be quite uncomfortable. And I remember when I arrived in St. Vincent on the 5th of June last year, the nurse was very thorough. She kept it there for about 2 minutes. And I thought I was going to vomit. Thankfully, I was able to control that sensation, and I had to have it repeated 5 days later. But I suspect these are the options. I know certainly in healthcare workers, they're saying that for unvaccinated healthcare workers, they recommend the swabbing, the nasopharyngeal swabbing, checking for the SARS-CoV-2 every 2 weeks. But I'm sure Mr. Samuels would be able to elaborate on this a lot better than myself, because this is not my area of expertise. But I think I've talked enough at this point in time. I'm certainly going to stick around for questions, because I think I remember a teacher in grammar school telling me in second form that the only silly question is the one that you don't ask. So if there are questions, please, we probably hold the questions for after Mr. Samuel speaks. But I hope that we have a very interactive session, and I put no time limit on. Although I was told originally that it finishes at 8. If it goes on beyond that, because there's still questions that people need answered, I am very willing to stick around. So thanks for listening, and I certainly look forward to your questions. Hi, Mr. Samuel, I think the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. The moderator is going to jump back in here for a little bit. Protocol having already been established, I beg to adopt the protocol. And I do say pleasant evening to all in attendance. And it's really a privilege and a pleasure to be here speaking to you again on matters of COVID-19 vaccination. Dr. Grant would have said quite a lot. And I just want to pick up on a few things where Dr. Grant would have left off. I want to begin on the issue of misinformation, because this seems to be where our greatest challenge to date is. Now, having done some lecturing myself, I like to tell stories to my class. So I'm going to begin with a short story. Now, beginning in the mid-20s, the tobacco industry understood that the public was becoming very concerned about health implications of smoking. Now, we have to realize that in the 1920s and 30s, lung cancer rate was skyrocketing. And in addition to that, researchers were beginning to find a lot of filth in tobacco. So things like arsenic, lead, diethylene glycol, these things were bringing to bear a lot of claims that smoking is causing cancer. Now, the tobacco industry leaders, they responded to the claims, they met, they deliberated, and they came up with a brilliant strategy. The strategy was one of distraction research. Now, what they did is that they promised to fund research. As a matter of fact, they pumped millions of dollars into research. And what they did was to research everything else except to look at the claim that cigarette smoking was causing cancer. Now, that strategy is something that is called manufactured ignorance. And it actually led to a study, and you can look it up, a study that is called agnotology, which is the study of ignorance and how it spreads in the society. Now, I say that to say, what is the moral of the story? When we began this journey in terms of combating the COVID-19 disease, as health professionals, we were concerned with what was affecting us then. So we were looking to build capacity for diagnostic testing on island. We were looking to provide the information to our public health team, and our public health team was concerned about contact tracing and having the facilities and the capacity for isolation. And I think where we erred, we were not thinking about how to prepare the public for vaccines. Now, while we were busy doing that, a little group of people who have always had an issue with vaccination, they were already out there putting a lot of misinformation into the public sphere. And they were saying to people, I mean, they're gonna bring this thing to you. And it's gonna be designed to cull, it's gonna be designed to sterilize, it's going to depopulate. And that information seeded and went around the world at the speed of light. And that is exactly what manufactured ignorance is designed to do. It's designed to exploit public uncertainty, and it's designed to manufacture doubt. So it clouds your decision, it clouds your rational thinking. Now, when the tobacco industry did this, would you believe that after numerous research pointed to cigarette smoke as the cause of cancer, there was still 8 trillion cigarette smokers around the world? 8 trillion. Because people couldn't come to a decision. People were thrown into a state of confusion, and they were thought that cigarette smoke causes cancer, but exposure to sunlight causes cancer as well. And all of these things contributed to people's inability to make a decision. Now, Dr. Grant and I are not here to ostracize or to mock anyone's hesitant towards taking a COVID-19 vaccine. I mean, we think it's reasonable for people to want more evidence, and Dr. Grant explicitly said that. I mean, people look at the technology, and to them, it's something that was developed overnight. It was developed at the speed of light. And we're going to point out to you that it was really not. But our goal at the end of these presentations tonight is to arm you with enough information so you can educate yourself, you can guide yourself, guide your family, guide your friends, guide your neighbors, and also your community to combat this barrel of fear. It is a barrel of fear and misunderstanding and misinformation that really is creating the hesitance that we are seeing because we don't have a lot of time. Dr. reiterated on the fact that we may think that we are privileged and we may think that we're lucky, but we're only given extra time. it is inevitable. I mean, we're seeing what is happening across the globe, and it's inevitable. Now, I've had the opportunity, I presented at the tourism conference, and I was given a list of reasons why people were hesitant to take the vaccine. It was quite an exhaustive list. I mean, I look at things like people not trusting the science, people's mistrust of government, persons who have underlying conditions. Some people just didn't know why they didn't want to take the vaccine. Some people are not taking the vaccine because somebody is saying to them that they shouldn't take it, and there isn't a rational reason why they shouldn't take the vaccine. But let's look at this in a pragmatic way. I mean, I see vaccines as a little dose of hope, and it really is. We can't deny that the vaccines are a little dose of hope. Since this pandemic began, what have been our options? What have been our alternatives? Social distancing, hand sanitizing, these things work, but they're difficult to implement, and sustainability is struggling us. We can't continue in this vein forever. We have to look at what is working. We're not saying that a vaccine is 100% effective. And in a sense, we have to understand the context with which vaccines are designed to work. And I'll get into that a little bit. So to date, we have available to us Pfizer. I mean, globally, Pfizer, Moderna, Sputnik, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson. We've seen where Cuba have now presented the Abdala, and Novavax is on the horizon in terms of awaiting emergency use authorization. In St. Vincent, we have had the privilege of having more than one type of vaccine. There are countries where there are no vaccines available. I've had a chance to look at the Caribbean vaccination data by country, and it pains my heart to see St. Vincent is struggling third from the bottom in terms of the percentage of persons vaccinated. And I would not even say third from the bottom, because Haiti was first, bottom of the list. Haiti do not have a vaccination program because they do not have vaccines. And we have available to us AstraZeneca, Sputnik, and we're getting Pfizer in a bit. And we are struggling to implement, struggling for the uptake of these vaccines. We were in a position where we had to donate vaccines to Trinidad just to avoid wastage. And Trinidad is now several tiers on the ladder above us in terms of their vaccination numbers. So vaccines have brought much hope as we lead this fight against the pandemic. It has also, it has also evoked widespread skepticism in some people, and I'm going to try to help you to combat this viral affair that we're dealing with. Now, there are persons who have an issue with the vaccination process itself, and these persons have been around for decades. These are the hardcore anti-vaxxers. And sometimes if you look at the messaging that is being put out on Facebook and the messaging that is being sent around, these messages are rooted in websites and Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts that are being managed by these anti-vaxxers. Somebody sent me an article recently about the CDC has acknowledged that vaccines have failed. So I looked at the article. It was coming from a website that was called Natural News. So I went and I looked at the website, and I was trying to trace the link, because they were making a claim and they had hyperlinks in the document, and I was following these hyperlinks. I wanted it to take me back to that CDC presentation where Dr. Walensky was admitting that the vaccine has failed. And there was no hyperlink leading me back to that presentation. And I went and I looked for that presentation myself. And what she was actually saying was that the Delta strain is so infectious that there is a small percentage of vaccinated people who are now becoming vulnerable to the Delta strain. And she was in no way saying that vaccination as a tool has failed. So you have to be careful, you have to be wary of the messaging that is out there and the underlying purpose of the message. Okay, so let's look at vaccines and let's talk about the CDC. Vaccines were rated as an amazing biomedical tool. Actually, in 1999, at the turn of the century, the Center for Disease Control declared that vaccines are the greatest public health intervention of the 20th century. Why? Because vaccines train your system to recognize and fight germs. A lot of people think that a vaccine is an antidote. A vaccine is not an antidote. A vaccine is not a barrier method. A vaccine do not prevent you from getting infected if you are exposed to an agent. And I'm not going to even say virus. The vaccine actually trains your immune system to recognize, and this is what is important, and this is why we are appealing to persons to become vaccinated, because there is a dichotomy between unvaccinated and vaccinated persons. There was a recent resurgence in Miami, and we are people who are driven by data. We are looking at the evidence-based decision-making type of paradigm. And when you look at the data for the hospital admissions in Miami, over 90% of the persons who are coming in as new infections with the Delta strain, those persons who are unvaccinated. So let me just take you back a little. And this is for the persons who have an issue with vaccination. Now, Edward Jenner in 1776, he performed the first set of inoculation. These were not even vaccinations. And this is where he is touted to be the father of vaccination based on what he did. So the disease that was ravaging the planet at that time was smallpox. I mean, smallpox was the agent of death. Many people died. It decimated millions. And he, through observation, he noticed that persons who were working with cows didn't develop smallpox. So what he did, he got some pus from a cowpox blister, and he used that to immunize persons, apparently healthy persons, against smallpox. And he noticed that that group of people did not develop the disease even after exposure to the agent. That was where the birth of vaccination is believed to have taken place. Now, if we fast forward 140 years in 1916, whooping cough, the first vaccine was created for whooping cough, and this was caused by an agent called whooping cough was the agent of death for young children. Young children was the recipient of death. This disease again decimated millions until a vaccine was developed. 12 years later, we saw a vaccine developed for diphtheria. 12 years after that, we saw the development of a vaccine for tetanus. So because of vaccines, the world was able to eradicate diseases like polio, smallpox, and a lot of other diseases that decimated and disfigured many people. So we know that vaccines work. And there are a lot of people who are against vaccination, and they are spreading their philosophy as if it's the truth across the internet, and people are adopting these philosophy to their detriment. A lot of people will say that they don't trust the science, that these vaccines were developed too quickly. So let's talk a little bit about the development of these vaccines. Now, the first set of vaccines that were used was a type of vaccines that were called live attenuated vaccines. And attenuation is just a big word to mean that what we were doing, we were just weakening the virus. Now, when organisms are highly infectious and able to cause death, they have a high mortality and morbidity rate. These organisms are equipped with what is called virulent factors. So what scientists can do is that they can remove the virulence. The virulence, think of a criminal who walks into a shop unarmed and says, "Give me all your money." He's likely to get beaten up and thrown out. If he walks in with brandishing 2 guns, it's a different scenario. Everybody's going to comply. So think of the guns as virulence. And what we do as scientists is that we remove the virulence and we weaken the organism. That's what was done before. And that organism was then injected into an individual. And it was believed that that individual immune system would be strong enough to suppress that organism while at the same time recognizing and building resistance to it. Now that worked. That I must say it worked, but it didn't work very well, because history have shown us that a number of persons developed what was called vaccine-acquired infections. And if I'm wrong, Dr. Grant will correct me, that the record demonstrates that there were persons who were inoculated with attenuated poliovirus who went on to develop polio. So it meant that the decision to revolutionize the approach to vaccination and to change the deployment of the payload was something that was being conceptualized and thought about a very long time ago. Now, the two vaccine method that we're using now, which is the viral vector vaccines and the mRNA vaccines, I will say to you that I did my undergrad at the University of Technology in Jamaica, 2000 to 2004. And when I did molecular, I was in the lab at that university doing a procedure that is known as recombinant DNA technology. And in recombinant DNA, what we did in the lab at that time, we were actually splicing a piece of human DNA into a bacterial plasmid so that we modify that organism to produce human insulin. And we carried out that experiment over and over and over, and we watched it work in the lab. So that technology that we're seeing today, that people are saying, oh, it's new technology. It's not a new technology. It is something that has been around for quite some time. And you're going to hear them saying to you that the test that we're doing in the lab that was developed by, his name is evading me now. I'll tell you in a while. That test was not designed as a diagnostic tool. But in 1985, when Dr. Kerry Mullis, and that's the name of the scientist, when Dr. Kerry Mullis stumbled across a bacteria that produced the enzyme that in all fairness, he wasn't thinking about a diagnostic tool. He was thinking about how he can amplify DNA. And to amplify DNA, it goes through a rigorous process of heating it to exorbitant temperatures so you can break that DNA apart and cooling it down. So you can add more strands and you can go through that process of annealing. Now, he wasn't thinking about a diagnostic test, but it doesn't negate the fact that his procedure has now become a very important and instrumental tool in the diagnosis of infections because of the specificity of DNA. I mean, we all know how specific DNA is. And using a PCR technology where we're just making more copies of whatever DNA we have, and then we're using specific probes and primers to identify the origins, the phenotypic and genotypic origins of that DNA. I can't see scientifically why people are planting information in other person's head to say it's not a good tool, it doesn't work, because it is nonsense. So let's go back to the science again. So viral vector. With the viral vector approach, we have done away with using the virus that is the agent of disease. And we are now replacing that agent of disease with another virus. In Sputnik and AstraZeneca, we're using a chimpanzee virus. And this chimpanzee virus have never caused infection in humans. It has never been known to cause infections in humans. And it has, in addition, been genetically manipulated. So we have removed all of the genes for replication. So we are sending a messenger. We are splicing that message. And the message is just a piece of messenger RNA that tells our cell, and we'll get to that, how to make a piece of this virus. And the messenger is a chimpanzee adenovirus. And we're sending that into your system. Dr. Grant would have explained about the target muscle and everything, but just think about the payload getting to that cell. When it gets to the cell and that virus enters the cell through that binding site, the virus heads straight to the cytoplasm. It does not in any sense, and this has been repeated time and time again, it does of the RNA or DNA from that virus into your genomics. In the messenger RNA technology, which is very similar to the viral vector, instead of using a virus to carry the payload, what we do is that we wrap that payload in a piece of lipid bilayer. And we use salts and sugars to stabilize the mixture. And that is what is injected into your arm. And that is what is taken into the cell. Now I want to get to a very interesting part, because you will hear the anti-vaxxers try to confuse you about nanotechnology. And these science are interfering with naturally occurring processes. And we are trying to play God. Now, for those of us who love science and who have been studying science for a while, we understand that the human body is an amazing invention. And the human body bears a capacity that is called a regenerative capacity. So think about having a car. And if this car gets into an accident, the car has the capacity to repair itself. And this is how our body operates. You get a cut, and if you put a camera on it and you time lapse it, you're gonna see that cut going through the healing process for itself, and it's gonna just mend it back together. Now, that happens because on a cellular level, your body has the capacity to decode information that is stored in your DNA that can be transferred to mRNA out into the cytoplasm and tell that organelle in your cell that is called a ribosome what amino acids to assemble to make a specific protein. And these proteins are used in the reparative process. These proteins are used to make hormones. These proteins are used to make all sorts of things. Now, when you get exposed to a virus, and this is the other thing, and this is what I want the anti-vaxxers and the vaccine hesitants to understand. The very thing that they are chastising science for, the virus does it. Because when you are exposed to COVID-19 and that virus enters your body through that portal and it gets into your cell through that receptor, the amount of viral particles you get is not enough to cause an infection. And these viruses are smart things. Smart. And just imagine a virus is not alive. It's not alive, it's not dead. It's in a suspended state of animation. But these viruses are able to reprogram your cell. And that ribosome that is there to decode the mRNA and to make proteins for your natural processes, the ribosome is now re-instructed to decode the virus mRNA to make more copies of the virus. And that is why when you are exposed to COVID-19 virus, today, the infection don't show up until 3 to 5 days later. Because first thing is that the amount of viral particles you get cannot by themselves cause an infection. They're too little. And they sit and they take your machineries and they make more of themselves until they have multiplied into millions. Now, by the time your body recognizes that there's an invader, boy, it's very often too late. The viral load is so high that your system is overwhelmed. And that's what throws you into that state of infection. Now, nobody knows where on the spectrum of infection you're going to end up. I mean, a lot of people tout and say, well, I see people get COVID-19 and nothing happened to them. They stay home for 14 days and then they go back to work. Yeah, because they ended up with a mild infection. It may be asymptomatic to mild, but you don't know where on the spectrum you're going to end up. You could have a mild infection. You could have a moderate infection. You could have a severe infection and you can die. I went jogging just 2 days ago and I met a good friend of mine, Dougie De Freitas. And we were talking about music. Everybody knows that music is my passion. And Dougie was telling me that there's a gentleman that he bought audio equipment from in Miami. And he knew this guy for over 30 years. And he spoke to the gentleman about getting vaccinated. And the gentleman replied to him was, he'll think about it. He got a call from the gentleman's son just about 7 days after he had the conversation with the gentleman to say that his father had succumbed to a COVID-19 infection. I have had a personal friend who traffics in Trinidad, and he has somebody who is underground in Trinidad who is his liaison, and that person does all of his business. He told me, boy, my partner duck out tonight. So we mean, so they found him in his house dead. When they did the postmortem, he's positive for COVID-19. COVID-19 is an agent of death.
And we have to think about what we have. No. Why would somebody sit and say, I want to wait 5 years to see what is going to happen? In 5 years, the planet, the population could be decimated. People are saying, I don't want chemicals in my body. We take medication for everything. I mean, I've sat and looked at my television, simple medication. When you look at the information that is required by law for them to give you, that says, while this infection is going to treat X, it is also going to damage A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T. And we have not seen this sort of resistance. So really and truly, looking at it, where the science is just replicating what happens in your body naturally. If you look at protein synthesis, I mean, your teachers, protein synthesis is being taught at secondary school biology level. And if you look at protein synthesis is exactly what happens when you take a vaccine. The messenger RNA is delivered to the cell. The ribosome takes in that messenger RNA. The messenger RNA is decoded because it's really just a bunch of code. That is where your oligonucleotide sits in base pairs of 3, and each base pair codes for an amino acid. And the assembling of the amino acid is what gives you that specific protein. You have to remember that as organic beings, we are inherently protein in nature. So the virus is a protein in nature as well. So what is happening there? What people is driving this whole web of fear about? And it's trying to tell you that these are nano operating system that is going to interfere with your biology, and it's going to upset hemostasis. It's utter nonsense. Look at the information for yourselves. Now, let's talk a little bit about how vaccines work, and this is important because there's a general perception that, and I get this from people a lot, but people who take the vaccine still getting COVID-19. Yes, and we have never said in any forum that you are immune to COVID-19 if you get vaccinated. And people are asking, so what if I get COVID-19 and I take the vaccine? Will it make me get better? We have never said that the vaccine is therapeutic. A vaccine trains your immune system. So here's a simple analogy, right? Let's think about a surveillance system for your house. So you have this dichotomy. You have one group of people who figure that I don't want any surveillance system in my house, I'm going to tough it out. And there are one group of people who say that, yes, I want to have a surveillance system. So two neighbors side by side, and there's a burglar on the loose. Now, the neighbor who have that surveillance system, which equates to having a vaccine, because the vaccines train your immune system to basically surveil, to look out for this virus. So your immune system is always on the lookout, looking for this virus, because the vaccine doesn't block the virus from getting into your system. The vaccine doesn't treat the virus when you are infected. You're supposed to get vaccinated so that as a apparently healthy person, you are prepping your system for the eventual encounter, right? So when that burglar enters, just like the virus is going to enter your system, an alarm is triggered. And for the persons who have that surveillance system, they're going to be awakened in night, and they're going to grab their defense, be it a firearm, be it a machete, and they have a fighting chance to neutralize that intruder before he have a chance to plunder and to destroy. For the persons who don't have that surveillance system, you're going to be in your nice slumber, and that burglar is going to enter your house. So will the virus. And the burglar now has time to go through your personal things and to take what he wants. And he might come and see your beautiful wife there, your children, and he might decide that he wants to rape and he wants to kill. And that is what happens when you are infected with COVID-19. You do not know where on the spectrum things are going to go. It might be a case where he just come and take a few things and disappear, equating to you having a mild infection and you recovered in a few weeks or days. But what if he decides to kill? What if the disease that you get, what if the infection that you get is one that results in hospitalization and death? How do you live with having brought that to a loved one who eventually dies, a child who eventually dies, knowing that you could have prevented that? Now, one of the things I want to touch on again, why vaccination is so important, are the variants. We have what is called variants of concerns, variants of interest, and variants under monitoring. Now, I know doctor would have said this already, but I want to drive it home again. When you are unvaccinated, you allow a very peculiar process to occur. You allow for incubation of the virus. So the virus is going to enter your system, and the virus is going to now sit there and build an army. It is going to make more copies of itself. It's just like a photocopying machine. When you run the paper them through, some of the paper come out crinked. And likewise, when a virus is copying itself, there are deletions in the codes. There are copies that don't come out the way it's intended to. And not all of these copies are bad, but some of these copies actually results in a new variant of the virus that is more transmissible, that is more capable of causing disease and death. And that's why currently we have 4 variants of concern that is circulating. The United Kingdom variant, the UK variant, which is the Alpha variant, the South African variant, which is the Beta variant. We have the Brazilian, which is the Gamma. And most recently, the Indian variant, that is the Delta. And doctor, I've said it to you, the infectious capacity of this virus, the R0, is so high. It is said to be equated to what is the thing again? It just dropped out of my mind. I'll remember in a while. But yes, then you have these variants of interest. And these variants of interest, what are they? A variant of interest is really a variant where the evidence is not yet available. However, evidence is still in its preliminary stage in terms of its capacity to cause disease, more severe disease, and how transmissible it is. And there are currently 4 variants of interest out there. I'm not sure how many persons know about theta and kappa and lambda and eta. These are variants of interest they're found in Nigeria, in the Philippines, in India, in Colombia and Peru. And there are also 22 other variants that are being monitored. 22 other variants that are being monitored. So think about it. Really and truly think about it. We are presented with a virus that is killing millions of people. Not because we sit here in our little pocket in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and we have not witnessed the death and hospitalization level that other countries have experienced. We can't turn a blind eye to it. We know it's there and it's inevitable. We don't know when it's going to come. What we are giving now is an opportunity to prepare ourselves as a people. We are trying to achieve herd immunity. Herd immunity is a mathematical formula. And in order for the mathematical formulas to work, we need the numbers. We need the numbers. If 70% of the population needs to be vaccinated, we have to achieve those numbers in order to benefit from herd immunity. The herd immunity is pretty simple now. I'm sure we've all looked at the National Geographic channels, and you're seeing where in the predator and prey scenario, where you have the leopards trying to prey on the zebras. When you have those young fragile animals alone by themselves out there, they're easy prey. When they're running with the pack, when they're running with the herd, it's a different scenario. The predators think twice. It's not easy for them to penetrate that herd to get to those vulnerable and fragile individuals. And that is why in this mathematical model, 70% of the population being vaccinated is going to provide that herd protection. for the persons who cannot be vaccinated, because some people have legitimate reasons why they cannot be vaccinated, and we can't overlook that. But if we get the persons who are capable of being vaccinated to get vaccinated and to sensitize their system where they turn out to be blockers. So when you're exposed to that infection, there's no time for that virus to replicate, because your system is triggered immediately, and you're fighting molecules, your antibodies and your B cells are triggered, and the virus is neutralized dead in its track. It doesn't happen in 100% of the cases because of the demonstrated efficacy. We know that some vaccines are only 92% efficacious, which means that there is still a small percentage of people on that spectrum who, even if vaccinated, can still develop an infection. And we have seen it translate into reality, and people tend to gloat in this. Oh, you see, you vaccinate and you still get COVID-19. The data was saying that from day one. But we were so caught up in manufactured ignorance. We were so led astray by agnotology that every little crack in the system, we just took it and ran with it. Let's look at the data. 3.2 billion people have been vaccinated globally. 3.2 billion, that is inching towards half of the world population. If this vaccine was designed to cull, where are the increased death rates across the planet? Not even in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we're seeing increased death rates. People are not dying more than normal. I mean, our vaccination levels are stagnated. We have only delivered upwards of 25,000, just under 26,000 doses, single dose of vaccines. And just under 10,000 persons have received a full dose. But for the last 8 months, we have not seen an increase in deaths. We have not seen an increase in coagulopathies. We have not seen where more persons are coming down with these clots, as that is being touted by the I don't even want to say anti-vaxxers, because I don't like to give them credence. But this group of people who are just designed to derail and to confuse. And we need to demystify what is happening with the vaccine, and we need to act on information that is real, that has been tested and proven. So instead of us going to sites like Natural News to get information, let's log into CDC webpage, and let's log into CARPHA and WHO, the Ministry of Health, and let's get the information and make an informed decision. What are our alternatives, really and truly? Some people say, I want to face the virus. I don't want to face the vaccine. Let me get the infection. Well, I have news for you. Doctor spoke about long COVID. Long COVID is not something that you want to experience. I mean, those of you who have had chikungunya, and I have had chikungunya, and I didn't even catch it in St. Vincent. I went on a conference in St. Martin and got chikungunya there. So just imagine getting sick in some place that is not your home, without your wife and your kids around to nurture you and to take care of you. And chikungunya went on to haunt me for months. Long COVID is worse than that. Brain fog, exacerbation of things like diabetes and hypertension and all of the underlying things. It just amplifies them. Why would you want to face the virus as opposed to face the vaccine? A vaccine not only does one thing, it preps your immune system to recognize the virus and to get rid of it quickly. It's not 100% foolproof, but yes, it works. It works. Some people are saying, what about ivermectin? And what about hydroxychloroquine? Now, ivermectin, the Food and Drug Administration have publicly stated that ivermectin, that they are going to withdraw the emergency use approval for ivermectin because it lacks the evidence that supports it as a drug for COVID-19. It's an antiparasitic drug, and it do not serve for the treatment or prevention of COVID-19. Ivermectin has failed. Hydroxychloroquine. Hydroxychloroquine is what we use to treat malaria. the quantity of hydroxychloroquine that is needed to treat somebody with COVID-19. I mean, I'm not sure how many persons know about therapeutics, but there's what is called a therapeutic window. In order for a drug to be effective, it must be given in that therapeutic window. If it's below the window, it's ineffective. If it's above that window, it's toxic. The levels of toxicity are dangerous. Hydroxychloroquine, in order for it to work, the levels are toxic. So it brings us full circle back to what I would like to describe as this little dose of hope, which is the vaccine. And for those of you who are listening to the persons who are spreading misinformation about there's a microchip in the vaccine and there's a programmable operating system, the information about the constituents of the vaccine is posted on the WHO site. And if the anti-vaxxers were so concerned about what is in the vaccine, and I'm sure that there are doctors and scientists who are part of those anti-vaxxers panel, they have had the chance to pull that vaccine apart molecule by molecule and to demonstrate to the public that they found X, Y, and Z in it. But you know why they haven't done it? Because there's nothing in it. Apart from that messenger RNA that is wrapped in a lipid bilayer, or that viral vector that is there to just transport the payload. There's only sugars and salts, and these are just stabilizers, The messenger RNA, once it's decoded, your cells are going to destroy it in a few days. It doesn't stay in your system. So they tell you that, that messenger RNA is going to stay into your system, it's going to integrate into your DNA. That is nonsense. There is no RFID chip in the vaccine. Absolutely none. So I want to encourage us as educated people to become more aware of where we can get good information and to use that good information to make a decision that is going to benefit all. I mean, I'm not going to touch on mandatory vaccines because it is not my business to talk about mandatory vaccines. But I'm here to tell you that vaccines is the best alternative that we have now. It is a good alternative, and vaccines will help us to return this society, our community, our country, our world to a new state of normalcy. Things are never going to go back to that benchmark that we knew before, but it's going to help us to return things to a new state of normalcy. So I implore you to look at the information and to make a decision that is good for you, your family, your community, and for the country of St. Vincent. And I yielded my presentation, and I'm back over to you, moderator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Samuel and Dr. Grant, for your presentations. Teachers, this is the end of the presentations. I'm not sure if there are any questions. Please indicate if you have any questions by raising your hands. Dr. Grant and Mr. Samuel, permit me to go in the chat to see if there are any questions there. We do have one question that I'm seeing so far in the chat, and this is asking, herd immunity, has it begun to work in any country yet? So I am assuming that that question is
Could you
perhaps.
repeat? The audio fell out a while ago.
Yes, the question is, has herd immunity begun to work in any country as yet?
Well, as far as I know, there are no countries that, 70+% have been vaccinated. The closest, I think, is Israel and maybe the US, maybe the UK. But just out of interest, the measles virus is much more infectious than COVID. In other words, it is, you're much more, if you're exposed to measles and you have not been immunized, you are much more likely to get it than if you're exposed to COVID and not been immunized. However, last year in 2020, there were about 46 cases of measles in the US, whereas there were well over close to between 300,000 and 400,000 deaths. Some sources would say close to 300 to 400,000 deaths. Yeah, some sources would say close to 500,000. And the reason for this is essentially because there's herd immunity because of vaccination for measles. The measles has been kept down to 40 cases. So without herd immunity, I'm just using that, juxtaposing in the same country where you have herd immunity for one particular disease, which is more infectious than COVID, okay? You have many, many more people, okay, dying and succumbing to COVID because you're far away from herd immunity. So herd immunity does work, and it is shown to work. For example, polio, the Sabin polio virus, which was first introduced in the 60s, the efficacy was only in the vicinity of about 70%. But yet, once about just over 50% of the population was vaccinated, the incidence of polio started to fall precipitously. And by the time the US reached 70%, there was virtually no cases of polio. So herd immunity is not a figment of anybody's imagination. Herd immunity it does work. It's a mathematical formula. And it is shown that it's like forming a shield. And I think Mr. Samuel used an excellent example. If you have, when the animals go out, they protect, like the stronger elephants protect the weaker ones. The stronger lions protect the weaker. And by the stronger ones being the ones that are facing the music, for the want of a better way of putting it, they're the ones that are protecting the weaker ones in the community, or the ones who just cannot receive the vaccine. Up to now, we're going to have the children within our community who are not going to be receiving the vaccine. And even if we get the Pfizer, which is licensed from 12 years and up, the younger ones are not going to be receiving the vaccine. They are vulnerable. They can come down with multi-system inflammatory syndrome. And those around them, parents and others, there's basically a responsibility, for the want of a better way of putting it, to try and protect them. And you protect them by making sure that your chances of transmitting the COVID, having the COVID, is significantly reduced. And the children in St. Vincent who have tested positive for COVID. There was a child in Beckwith about 6 weeks ago who was positive for COVID. There was a child in Canawan who was positive for COVID. So it's not that we don't have kids who have been exposed and have been diagnosed with COVID. We're just lucky that no child has actually died. But as mentioned, one died in Antigua recently, at least 3 in Guyana, 1 in Barbados. And, that's 3 plus 1 plus 1, 5. That's 5 too many. And if we have one child dying in St. Vincent, if we can prevent that child from dying by those around that child being vaccinated, I think that's a very good reason to take the vaccine.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Grant. I have another question. This question relates to women who are pregnant and or breastfeeding. How does the COVID vaccine, are there any implications to women who are pregnant or breastfeeding if they take the COVID vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine?
Okay. Interestingly, there's an increasing body of evidence.
I did not hear the question.
Hi. Hello? No, there's an increasing body of evidence which is showing that the vaccine is quite safe in women. I'm not going to for a moment suggest, sorry, pregnant women. I'm not for a moment going to suggest that all pregnant women go and have the vaccine, but I'm certainly going to suggest that high-risk pregnancies check with the gynecologist to see if they would benefit, because pregnancy is a risk factor for coming down with a severe form of the COVID, either ended up being hospitalized or dying. And the additional risk factors that pregnant women can encounter, such as gestational diabetes, which is basically sugar, elevated blood sugar in pregnancy, or diabetes in pregnancy, and preeclampsia, which is essentially high blood pressure in pregnancy. Those women who suffer with one or both of these things should check with a gynecologist and see if they're candidate for the COVID vaccine. It is quite safe to breastfeed after having taken the COVID vaccine. I see another question in the chat. The COVID, so far from his presentation, I understand that COVID caused the body to age. So after getting the vaccine, does this deterioration improve? The vaccine has not been shown to necessarily reverse what COVID causes. Now, having COVID, it's still recommended that you have at least a vaccine, well, depending on the type of vaccine. If it's a Sputnik, about 3 weeks after. If it is the Oxford AstraZeneca, six to 8 weeks after. But if you have evidence where having the COVID infection has damaged, for example, your brain, your lung, etc., taking the vaccine is not going to reverse this, at least not in the initial instant. But hopefully it stops you from coming down with an additional COVID infection, which can make an already bad situation worse.
Someone is also asking if for any information on long-term COVID, if you can guide them to any further research where long-term COVID is concerned.
Elliot, I don't want to try and hog the show, but I just want to give an example, a very famous example. If I don't follow Grand Prix racing, but I think most of us are aware of the most famous Grand Prix driver ever, has Grenadian roots, Lewis Hamilton. He just won the Hungarian Grand Prix this weekend, and he has declared that he is most likely suffering with long COVID. Long COVID, you can get a lot of information on it. I would recommend long COVID, Googling 200 plus symptoms, put in that long COVID in inverted commas, 200 plus symptoms in inverted commas, and narrowing your search for the last month, because there is information that research that was published within the last month, which showed that there's some individuals who have up to 50 of these 200 symptoms. And this is not, again, a figment of one's imagination. This is real, and it is very debilitating. Up to 20% of individuals who have had a COVID infection cannot return to work. And this is not only isolated to or unique to countries like the UK and the US, etc. There's a doctor who would tell you that one of his patients, a very strapping construction worker who came down in COVID in February in St. Vincent has been unable to get back to work. And, I think we need to put together a very solid database looking at the COVID infections in St. Vincent and seeing who has actually ended up with long COVID. But, they have very subtle symptoms and they are very obvious. We know, as Mr. Samuel mentioned, the brain fog, the tiredness, the shortness of breath, on minimal exertion, the chronic headaches, the intermittent fevers, etc. But these are only the tip of the iceberg. COVID affects multiple organ systems, and the scarring effects, they're shown that if you do MRIs of individuals, a lot of individuals who have COVID, if you do MRIs of the brain, you find the aging process has been accelerated significantly. A new study just came out, and you can Google this too, that showed that the IQ of the average COVID sufferer falls a few points after having COVID. In other words, COVID seems to damage the brain to a point, the cognitive part of the brain, so that it compromises your intelligence. So this is not something that any of us can afford, especially those of us who need to use our heads to be able to ply our trade and to hold on to our jobs. Elliot, you want to add?
Okay.
I saw a question.
I was just about to.
Sorry, I had to interject, but I had my hand up for the longest while. I think I probably forgot my question.
I'm sorry, I didn't see any hands up. I've been looking to see, but I didn't see any. So my apologies, but go ahead.
Thank you very much, dear. My hand was up, but yes. So Dr. Elliot Samuel and Dr. Grant, I want to say thank you very much for the information that you shared, okay? Dr. Samuel, you mentioned that no one knows on which end of the spectrum we might contract the COVID, right? But isn't it true that we also do not know what might happen to our bodies if we take the vaccine? That's one question I have.
Well, okay, so let me just take that question. We tend to be guided by science a lot of the times. And I've heard persons saying that they want to wait 2 years to see what's going to be the long-term effect. But historical data have shown, and vaccines are something that have been around for a long time. And I don't know why we're trying to single out COVID-19 vaccine although something is bad about it. But as Dr. Grant said, for persons who have been vaccinated, the historical data is showing that persons who are getting an adverse reaction, that adverse reaction tends to come in about 5 weeks. And for the persons who have been vaccinated globally, there is enough data beyond that 5-week spread to suggest any adverse reaction to be had from vaccination, and we are not expecting any. So for the persons who have had reaction, those reactions were well within the expected time frame, and those reactions were charted. Some of them were mitigated against. Some of them may have had disastrous effect, but those are pretty few and far apart. But in terms of waiting around for 2 to 5 years to say something might happen along that way, we the scientists don't believe it's going to happen, and we're not going to extrapolate that belief onto people as well. Based on the historical data, vaccine, if something is going to happen in terms of an adverse reaction, it tends to come in within that 5-week period.
Okay, so then some people believe it will happen, and some people do not believe it will happen. Okay.
No, it's not.
One last question.
Can I interject? It's not a matter of belief, okay? It is what the scientific data shows. Nobody is, okay, this is another fallacy that's thrown up by the anti-vaxxers to deter people from becoming vaccinated. Nobody has been able to, there are over 4 billion people that have received a COVID vaccine now, okay? And no one has had a side effect beyond 30 days to 35 days, okay? So why, some side effect is going to appear in how many years? 2 years' time? As mentioned earlier, there have been very similar vaccines given to very similar coronaviruses, specifically the MERS, which was emerged in 2013. And these vaccines were given in a trial of hundreds of people. And these hundreds of people are still, for the most part, yes, some of them may have died from old age, etc. But those that are around, none of them have had any long-term side effects. So you're looking at a similar vaccine given to a very, very almost an identical virus, and there's been no long-term side effects. So why do we expect this? This is just thrown up to put doubt in people's minds so that it creates an atmosphere where people do not go forward and take the vaccine, and there's further spread of the illness. Because if on a personal level, why would I advise my children to go ahead and become vaccinated? Nobody has been able to answer that question up to now. Okay, and I, with my scientific knowledge and scientific background, and having followed the virus for so long, I would have to be suicidal, and not only suicidal, homicidal, to want to expose my children to a vaccine that is possibly going to be harmful in the short term, medium term, or long term. Again, I dismiss until one comes with evidence. So the belief. I believe there are people who believe the earth is flat, okay? Because they believe the earth is flat, doesn't give credence to that belief, okay? Because it is shown that that belief is, again, that holds no water. Similarly, long-term effects of the COVID vaccine, I mean, it would be very, very strange, considering that very, very similar vaccines were administered over 8 years ago for a very similar virus, and none of those individuals have had long-term side effects. I mean, produce one. I invite anyone.
Okay, thank you so very much to you both for your answers. I have one last question. Dr. Samuel drew an analogy. He was talking about a burglar coming into your house and can take your wife, and he was drawing that analogy. So drawing on that same analogy, I am asking, will the vaccine stop the burglar from taking any of these things or from killing the person?
That was my intention. So the thing is that when you allow the vaccine to prep your system, what you have done is that you have created a warning system. So your immune system now have the capacity to recognize this virus and to respond quickly. So when we speak about efficacy data and we say that the vaccine is 92% effective, we are saying that in 92% of the cases where a vaccinated person comes into contact with COVID-19, that virus is going to be stopped in its track before it have a chance to set up and cause diseases. And if it do cause disease, in the small 8%, it's going to be mild disease. It's not going to result in hospitalization, and it's not going to result in death. And that is why we encourage people to become vaccinated, because you are given the advantage of having that system that detects and neutralizes the virus before the virus can create infection and before it can begin to replicate, that allows for mutant strains to form. And this is extremely important to us. We need to stop the production of mutant strains, and we need to begin to look at how do we halt the virus from causing infection in the population.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'm sorry, but once my mic is open, I have one last question. If you're vaccinated, Dr. Samuel, and I am not, how am I affecting you? You are vaccinated and I am not vaccinated. How am I affecting you? Negatively,
so
that is.
when you look at the data again, we're not speaking about individual people, right? We are saying that the pool of persons who are unvaccinated, they are the persons who are driving the infection. They are considered to be super spreaders. So when we look at the data, like data coming out of Miami, these new strains tend to affect mostly persons who are unvaccinated. So they are allowing, unvaccinated people are allowing for the perpetuation of the infection in the community. They have a greater propensity to get sick and to spread the infection. So yes, unvaccinated people do affect the vaccinated persons. And the other thing is that when we speak about herd immunity, and we tend to like to shift the goalpost, that herd immunity isn't working, because yes, you have communities where you now have 70% persons vaccinated, but it is not effective. Because we have stayed so long and remain hesitant for such a long time to get vaccinated, When we remember, this virus is not taking a holiday now. And while we're here debating whether or not we should take it, the virus is continuing its plunder. And it's creating new strains, it's creating more deadly strains. So by the time we do get around to getting the vaccines we have out, we have a new challenge on our hands again. We have a new strain that if we're not careful, we are allowing for things like viral immune escape. So we have to be careful that we are doing the right thing in the right time and offering the protection that is needed. So yes, I think unvaccinated people, in a sense, do prevent us from achieving the desired outcome in terms of how do we stop this virus.
But how can that be when, I'm just asking for clarity, okay, because this would determine whether I am vaccinated or not, because I am not anti-vax, but I think that people need to get the right information if they are to,
yes,
you know, to choose. So my other question is, how could it be that the unvaccinated are affecting the vaccinated when those who are vaccinated can still contract the virus?
No, okay, can I get in here? Remember that mention that the vaccinated people, those that are frail, those that are elderly, those that are immune compromised can still die from the virus after being vaccinated. The vaccine is not foolproof. So, okay, you're teaching a class, okay, you carrying the virus, you pass it on to a child, okay, who then goes home to his grandmother, who's very elderly, she's frail, she's vaccinated, but because she's now exposed, okay, to the virus, she's one of the few that the vaccine doesn't work in, and she comes down with it, okay, and she dies, okay. Now, so again, this is, and you expose to somebody who is immune compromised, the vaccine may not work as well in them. They can come down with it. So the unvaccinated can affect not all the vaccinated, but a percentage. And one person dying as a result of an unvaccinated person being exposed to them is just one too many. I don't know. That's how I think about it. I would be very, very upset if a child of mine attending school, okay, comes home, and I know that the only place they go straight from school to home. And when they do contact tracing, they find out that the teacher is teaching them is positive, okay? But that child comes home, spends time with granny, and granny suffers with Alzheimer's. She is 85 years old, she's very frail, and she ends up dying as a result of the child bringing home the virus. That can happen, even though she's vaccinated. So no, none of us is saying that the vaccine will guarantee that you can't get it. But if you're healthy, generally, if you come down with the virus, you're going to come down with a very mild form, where it's going to be nothing more than a cold, mild to moderate. But if you are immune compromised in any form or fashion, okay, and the elderly, the immune system doesn't work as well. Not saying that they should not be vaccinated. Yes, they should be. It's better than nothing. You give them a fighting chance. But if you still, in spite of that, you don't want to overburden their already weakened system, and then they end up dying.
Okay, Dr. Grant and Dr. Samuel, thank you very much for answering my questions and for the information that you shared.
You're welcome.
Okay, Dr. Grant, Mr. Samuel, the next question is, who are the persons? Well, there are two questions here. The first one is, who are the persons that are not eligible for the vaccine? And secondly, can you explain again about the multi-inflammatory syndrome?
Mrs. Samuel, you want to? Okay, all right, I'll take a shot at it. Dealing with it's a multi-system inflammatory syndrome. This is very similar to something called Kawasaki's disease that was first diagnosed in Children about, well over 30 years ago. and where it affects like the heart, the kidneys, other organ systems. So that's it's called multi-system inflammatory syndrome, and it causes inflammation of these organ systems. And it can end up causing scarring of these very organs. And interestingly, if it affects the heart, it can result in something called arrhythmias, which is abnormal rhythms of the heart, which some of these arrhythmias can be fatal. So multi-system inflammatory syndrome, it can affect the kidneys, cause kidney failure. It can affect the brain and cause brain damage. So hence the name multi-system inflammatory syndrome, but it seems to be more peculiar to children. Who are those that are not eligible? For example, somebody who is immune compromised on significant doses of immune suppressant drugs, for example, methotrexate, azathioprine, high doses of steroids, etc. Those individuals, while on high doses of these drugs, is not recommended that they have the vaccine, because those drugs may suppress the immune response. Okay, so if these individuals are on high doses, the doctors are going to try and taper the doses of these medications before giving them the green light to go ahead and become vaccinated. Individuals who may have a history of severe allergies to any of the components of the vaccine. And the components of the vaccine, as Mr. Samuel says, is listed in the public domain. Most of these components are extremely common, essential amino acids, etc., sucrose, water for injection, etc. Individuals who have multiple allergies, they're allergic to everything under the sun, allergic to number of drugs, number of foods, etc. But even such individuals, if you look at their risk factors, say they're diabetic, hypertensive, cancer survivors, etc., they may still need the vaccine, but under controlled settings where they are vaccinated within a hospital setting. So just in case they have an extremely severe allergic response, you can do the necessary, what they call intubation and procedures to reverse the allergic response. But they're few and far between those who there's an absolute contraindication.
Okay, I hope that helps. Mr. Samuel, do you want to take a shot at the next question, which is who are eligible, who are the persons that are not eligible for the vaccine?
I think Dr. would have mentioned quite a few groups there, persons who are known to have severe allergic reactions. But in a general sense, the efficacy data is only there for persons above 12 to 18 if it's the Pfizer vaccine, it's above 18 for the AstraZeneca and for the Sputnik. So for the two vaccines that we have on island now, which is the Sputnik and the AstraZeneca, the eligible population is going to be the 18 and above. And still within that population, if you have any underlying medical conditions that you want to discuss with your physician, it's always advisable to do that before. If you're known to have a predisposition for clots, if you're known to have a predisposition for allergies, you should have that discussion with your physician before. In terms of contraindications, there are not any known contraindications to the vaccines. I've heard a person say, if I'm a diabetic, if I'm hypertensive, if I'm pregnant, and while we're a little bit cautious about the pregnancy part, still we haven't seen where it's listed as a contraindication. So it's really about having that dialogue with your physician and just to ensure that you're within the age group based on the vaccine that you're taking. We are going to be getting Pfizer in a few weeks. I think some doses of Pfizer are here for a selected group. It's not really available to the public as yet. But the Pfizer really goes down to, I think, age 12. Anything from 12 to 18 can get the Pfizer. And For those who don't have access to the Pfizer, it's really that 18 and above age group, barring that you have any conditions that you would want to discuss with your physician.
Okay, teachers, do you have any other questions?
Good night.
Good night. Go ahead.
I have a question that I would like to ask.
Certainly, go right ahead, sir.
Okay, now let us suppose that I am a bit reluctant to take the vaccine because I am waiting on the vaccine to be approved by the FDA. What would the good doctors advise me to do?
The FDA is not necessarily the gold standard. This is an example I give to patients. I've been around medicine since the 80s. I was a medical student in the mid 80s. And I remember going into private practice in the early 90s. And at that point in time, the FDA announced that it had approved metformin as for the treatment of type 2 diabetes. Now, as a medical student, I was prescribing metformin in the mid-1980s. It was not approved by the FDA. Okay, in other words, if we waited on the FDA's lead, we would not, a lot of our patients would not have had the benefit of metformin until the early to mid 1990s. Okay, so much so I remember a patient coming into me and thinking that they were all smart with themselves. So Dr. Grant, yeah, you just recently diagnosed me with diabetes. I want the latest in terms of medication. I want the metformin. So I had a little chuckle with him and said, look, maybe it's the latest in the United States because it was just FDA approved, but it's not the latest in this part of the world because we've been using metformin for over 10 years now. So waiting on the FDA's approval is not necessarily, there's a lot of politics involved quite often because, for example, AstraZeneca would probably never be approved in the United States. And it's not because it's not a good product. It's because it competes directly with a US product, Johnson & Johnson, which has a very, very similar background in terms of they're both what we call viral vector vaccines, but yet the FDA has approved the Johnson & Johnson and has not approved the AstraZeneca. Personally, I will take the AstraZeneca any day over the Johnson & Johnson. Why? Because the efficacy of the AstraZeneca after full dosing, recommended dosing, is a lot better than the Johnson & Johnson. So here's one saying, well, okay, we are going to use the FDA's approval as a gold standard. So then we are going to go with the Johnson & Johnson. You are probably going to be taking something inferior. And, you know, to compare vaccines is vaccines raw data prior to real world approval or real world use, sorry, is not necessarily comparing the same things. Because, for example, I make the point, I mean, I like cricket. If you put me on a placid pitch, absolutely no bumps, a poor bowler, I'd probably look like a great batsman. You take Brian Lara in his prime and you put him on a cow track with Curtly Ambrose bowling to him, and Brian Lara would probably look like the worst batsman in the world. So you're not, again, the Pfizer was carried out, the initial studies with Pfizer, and not knocking Pfizer and Moderna, were carried out in different conditions to the Oxford AstraZeneca. So to compare that one has 90-something% efficacy versus another one has 80% efficacy, you're not comparing likes, okay? Real world data have shown that both of them are virtually the equivalent. Certainly in the UK, where they've used both in a parallel way, there's been shown, the Pfizer has not been shown to be any more beneficial than the Oxford AstraZeneca or vice versa. Okay, so, you know, for us to use the FDA as a standard, and again, FDA is going to approve Pfizer, which because it is an American product. Moderna is almost of the same ilk, and that is probably going to take a little longer to be approved. I'm not knocking Pfizer for a moment, but I'm saying one has to understand the process. One has to understand what you're accepting versus what you're rejecting. And you may be actually rejecting something that is very good for you. I mean, why would, again, why would I, and I keep lamenting this point, why would I approve, okay, knowing what I know of the use of AstraZeneca in any of my children? Because I know it's a very good product. My kids, yes, within 24 hours, they had flu-like symptoms. One had chills, etc. But I asked them point blank, is it something that you would use again if you had to from scratch? Of course. Is it something that you would recommend? Of course. And my children are not, they're the typical youngsters of today. They don't, not if I tell them turn right, they're not going to turn right because I said turn right. They're going to want an explanation. Okay, that's how I raised them. And they don't do anything to please me. So my point is, on a personal level, I strongly recommend the 2 vaccines that are currently available here. And I say that, all of a sudden, everybody, with all due respects, has turned into being a medical expert. If I had an electrical issue with my home tonight, I'm not going to be calling a doctor or a teacher or fisherman. I'm going to be calling an electrician. Okay, yes, I may Google certain things to see if I can have greater understanding, but I'm not going to pretend that I have the experience or the training of a professional in that area. But all of a sudden we have 110,000 people in St. Vincent, and we have 110,000 people who know what they're about relative to the vaccine. And, I honestly wish people the very best. Sometimes I feel like throwing up my hands because I know I'm protected. I know my family is protected, but I don't. And the main reason I don't is there's a sadness that comes over me when I realize that people are making the wrong decisions based on the misinformation or disinformation that's presented to them. And I feel sad about that. It's like, it's like me telling you, that something bad is going to happen to you, knowing fully well that it's not, but just for the fun of it. And, and then if I say it often enough, the story is going to come back to you from a number of different sources. And then eventually you're going to start believing, well, it got to be true because everybody is saying this. But, be careful, just be careful, who is the source of your information? Dr. Thompson quite often talks about them as a dirty dozen. But it's shown that there are about 12 major sources of misinformation. Dr. McCullough, natural news, yeah, quite a few, the Kennedy, the grandson of the former president of the United States. And a lot of these individuals are telling you, don't take the vaccine, but almost in the same breath, they're telling you, we can sell you product, these vitamins or so forth, that would protect you from the virus. And we have people in St. Vincent like that too. I mean, I did 2 days before the eruption, was in Chateaubriand on the vaccination drive. And there was a lady who was vociferously opposing the vaccine, saying that, y'all are mad, don't go and take any vaccine, putting poison into your system. And then somebody whispered to me that, look, she went and took the vaccine. So I went over and quietly had a conversation and said, what's going on? I understand you took the vaccine. Why are you, discouraging others? She told me she didn't want to talk about it. I said, did you have any adverse effects? She couldn't answer. But she was discouraging people. So, some of the people, I understand there's a particular doctor in St. Vincent who actively discourages people from being vaccinated, but he had his mother and other family members vaccinated after having discouraged people and still discouraging. So just be careful. Be careful.
Okay, Doc, thanks for the clarity. I have another question, and I may have a final question that persons may find funny or even dumb. But my other question is, now I remember in the past that it was said that persons die from COVID in St. Vincent and Grenadines. My question is, have we had anyone dying as a result of taking the vaccine in St. Vincent and Grenadines?
I have asked Dr. Keyser that question a week and a half ago, and she has told me no. I have no reason to doubt her. because as professionals, I would expect a certain level of honesty. I have no reason to doubt her. And she, as a chief medical officer, should be aware of any adverse reactions anybody has had, and especially anybody who has died. Have persons died after taking the vaccine? From what I understand, possibly 2, but just remember, okay, because B follows A does not mean that A is the cause of B. And I'm not trying to defend the vaccine. Let me be very honest with you. One particular person who died after the vaccine, when I heard about it, my heart sank, because I honestly thought at that point in time that it could have been vaccine related. And I made it a point, because I said, if this is the case, I am going to, I'm going to back off. And I made it a point to investigate that case fully. In other words, follow up, because he had to have an autopsy. And I am comfortable in saying, after such information was garnered, I am quite comfortable in saying that he did not die as a result of the vaccine. And, we have to be careful that while there could be association, there is no causation. And I keep using the analogy, quite often roosters all over in Union, they had some roosters that would wake me up in the morning. But because they crowed and the sun rose shortly after, did not mean the sun rose as a result, but there was an association. The sun rose shortly after. So, we have to be careful when we jump and, we, for one reason or the other, out of fear, further justifying our position for rejecting the vaccine, and the anti-vaxxers as further ammunition against the vaccine. Well, you see, John Smith took the vaccine, and a week later, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, he died. And, yes, you can't deny the fact that the vaccine was given. You can't deny the fact that the individual died. But what you have to really ask yourself is a hard question. Is there a legitimate linkage? And, if you know the what we call the pathogenesis of these clots, you would understand that, yes, clots occur, okay? As mentioned, I had a patient in Union who had a clot, and she had no vaccination, okay? But if she did have a vaccine, there was no way that we could convince anyone that there was no association, okay, including the patient herself. So, because something occurs after a particular event does not necessarily mean that the original event caused what happened subsequently.
Again, thanks, Doctor.
Hi, good night.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I think might be a bit funny, is that in your capacity as a doctor, if you want to convince me from a medical standpoint not to take the vaccine, would you be able to do so?
Not knowing what I know, well, depends. If you have a significant medical contraindication, okay, yes. But if there is nothing wrong with you in terms of, from a medical point of view, okay, I can't convince you to do something that goes against my underlying philosophy. As I mentioned, I am not pro-vaccine, I am pro-science. And I have, after reviewing the science specifically of the original HIV vaccine, the original Zika vaccine, the original dengue vaccine, I've rejected all those, and I will go to the end of the earth to discourage people from taking those vaccines, okay? But when I review the science relative to this vaccine, I have no problems with the Oxford AstraZeneca, the Sputnik, the Moderna, the Pfizer. I mean, you put me on the spot, the Sinopharm and Sinovac, which are the 2 Chinese vaccines, and nothing against China, I have my reservations, okay? So if those were the vaccines available in St. Vincent, I would not be here having this conversation with you right now, because those vaccines have some major issues as far as I'm concerned, but those are not what's available. And before we run out and have to get to those vaccines, which Barbados has had to use now, get what is available to you, okay?
Okay,
Thank you again,
thank you
Doc.
very much, Dr.
Bye-bye.
Grant. Thank you very much, Dr. Grant.
You're welcome.
It is almost 9 o'clock and we've been here since before 6, and I know this is a topic that we can go on, and we may have to actually invite both you and Mr. Samuel back to do another session as it stands.
Thursdays may be difficult for me. I do a program on NBC, Physician on Call. So I was lucky that they had Parliament today, so that would have canceled that program. So I was able to participate. I would love to come back, but if it's a Thursday, I may have difficulty.
Okay, and we will take note of that. At this time, I want to say a heartfelt thank you to both of you. Thank you for coming on board and explaining things to us. I want to thank the participants in the first session here. Teachers, I want to thank you so much for taking your time out and just coming and sitting and listening. I know you guys have a lot more questions, and because we are, limited on time, it's obvious that we have to bring this session to an end tonight. We would definitely look at having another session. Again, thank you very much, Dr. Grant. Thank you very much, Mr. Samuel.
Thank you.
Teachers, thank you so much for participating.
It was my pleasure.
On behalf of the National Executive of the Teachers Union, we say thanks again. I bid you guys good night and be safe. Okay? Thank you.
Be safe and take care. Night-night.
Bye.